Chapter 828. Originally, Agar Dorji wanted to call for a retreat. He was truly afraid of Yang Chendong, but now that Fan Yuhai said so, he didn't know what to say. On the other hand, although Suitor was also afraid of Yang Chendong, it wasn't to the point where he would retreat without a fight. Now that he heard Fan Yuhai's words, he pondered for a moment and asked, "How confident are you in this battle, General Fan?" "At least 50%. Fan Yuhai answered quickly this time. Clearly, he already had a plan in mind. He was being conservative. He had already gone to the city wall to take a look. The sudden appearance of the mercenaries did scare some people, but the enemy's strength was limited. From afar, there were only about 10,000 people. If the three sides combined, there would be close to 60,000 people, and all of them were cavalry. In the past, such a force wouldn't be a problem to conquer the southern Ming Empire. But now, with 60,000 people against 10,000, what was there to be afraid of? 50%? Suitor nodded. "Then we can fight. How about this? I will hand over the command of my Mongol army to you. I hope you won't betray this Khan's trust." The atmosphere in the hall froze because of this sentence. Agar Dorji raised his head in disbelief and looked at Suitor. Handing over the military power was equivalent to handing over all of his family's lives. Suitor was really magnanimous. "Thank you so much. Yuhai won't disappoint you." A look of surprise flashed across Fan Yuhai's face, but he quickly recovered. However, when he opened his mouth, the way he addressed Khan had already changed. He only called him Khan and did not mention his name, but it was already a sign of closeness. Good. Suitor seemed to be very happy when he heard the change in the way he addressed Agar Dorji. He wanted to see what Agar Dorji would choose. Agar Dorji didn't seem to hear the conversation at all. He just lowered his head and pondered. It was absolutely impossible for him to hand over his military power. He had never completely trusted a person. Back then, he didn't trust his elder brother Tuachuo Khan. Now, he couldn't even trust his own son Horror, let alone an outsider like Fan Yuhai who came out of nowhere. Agar Dorji didn't say anything. Suitor's face flashed with anger. "What? I've already handed over my military power. Are you still not willing to hand over your 15,000 troops?" If they wanted to defeat the mercenaries, they had to give it their all. They couldn't afford to have any other people involved. Since that's the case, Yuhai will go out and prepare. Fan Yuhai, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any intention of forcing Agar Dorji. Perhaps he knew that even if he tried to persuade him, Agar Dorji wouldn't hand over his military power. If he went overboard, it would only lead to internal instability. Since that was the case, it was better not to force him. Of course, he dared to make such a decision because he had the determination to defeat the mercenaries after taking over the military power under Sud Khan. So what if he was a war god? Without soldiers, how could he overturn the heavens with his own strength? After Fan Yuhai finished speaking, he didn't wait for anyone else to say anything and turned around resolutely. Sud Khan coldly snorted, flicked his sleeves, and stood up. He didn't even look at Agar Dorji, leaving the father and son alone in the hall. "Father, they've all left. Let's go back too." Har Dorji saw that there was no point in staying here with his father. He reached out to help his father stand up from the chair. "Sigh, it seems like we can't stay here for long." Agar Dorji sighed from the bottom of his heart as he slowly stood up with the help of his son. In the past, he had a good relationship with Fan Yuhai. In fact, Fan Yuhai was even his subordinate. The two of them had joined forces to resist the powerful Sud Khan. But now, Fan Yuhai had obviously been roped in, which caused the situation to change drastically. The previous fairness had been broken. As the weaker party, it was naturally very dangerous to stay here. Now that there was a powerful enemy in front of them, no one would do anything to him. But what if the mercenaries retreated? Then it would be time to clean up the internal affairs. It would also be time for victory and defeat to be decided. Even if he wanted to leave, it wouldn't be so easy. Or had always been like this. There was no definite right or wrong. No one would talk about benevolence, righteousness, and morality. Everyone was just trying to strengthen themselves. In order to achieve this goal, everyone might be friends eating meat and drinking wine together today. Tomorrow they might draw their swords and fight to the death because of benefits. Agadorji's sigh was heard by his son, Halajuo. Halajuo was quite clever, so he suggested, "Father, let's just watch from the sidelines for now. We don't need to worry about who wins or loses. Let's just let them fight until both sides are injured. This will only be beneficial to us." Him? Agar Dorji raised his head with a look of hesitation. Originally, he wanted to send some troops to express his goodwill. But when he heard his son's words, he felt that it was very reasonable. That's right, since they were going to fall out, what benefits would there be if he didn't send troops? At most, he would lose his own troops. In the face of a great enemy, who would dare to do anything to him? Since that was the case, he might as well laugh and watch the wind and rain. Perhaps there would be an opportunity for him. My son is right. How about this? Father is tired and needs to go back and rest. During this time, without my orders, my army cannot move a single soldier. Those who disobey will be executed. Agar Dorji's voice was like a flood, his expression firm. However, after saying this, his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had suddenly aged a lot. Even his steps became unstable. It was as if he really needed a good rest. If such a person didn't become an actor, it would be a waste of his talent. After Fan Yuhai obtained the military power of the Mongol tribe, he immediately gathered all the generals for a military meeting. With Sud Khan at the helm, although the generals had some opinions in their hearts, they did not show it. Instead, they followed the instructions of the meeting and started to send out troops. 2 hours after the mercenaries had surrounded the city, the Mongol army finally reacted. Troops with all sorts of flags came out of the city and formed a huge formation 5 miles in front of the city. Looking from afar, it looked like a sea of black, giving people a feeling that they were endless. In comparison, the 10,000 mercenaries that surrounded the city appeared to be a little weaker. However, when some people felt uneasy, they couldn't help but look at the war god's banner above the main formation. When they saw the more than 100 black riders below the banner, they felt reassured. As long as the war god was here, they wouldn't be afraid of any opponent or enemy. Even if the enemy outnumbered them by a few times, it would still be the same. The war god had such a godly power. Yang Chendong rode on the white dragon horse and stood in the middle of the formation. He used his binoculars to look at the Mongol cavalry coming out of the city. A hint of a smile flashed past his eyes. His gaze then became resolute as he calmly said to the flag-bearer, "Order the entire army to prepare for the enemy's charge. Use guns from afar and arrows from close range. Don't get entangled with the enemy." The flag fluttered high up in the air. After this order was passed down, the independent division and the various regiments followed his orders and made their defensive preparations. The 6-gun battalions of the independent division had already been broken. They were split up in front of the other regiments. Just like that, each regiment only had 1-gun battalion. However, they were split up evenly. This also calmed the hearts of the soldiers, and they would not panic because of the enemy's charge. Outside the city, the Mongol army was gathering. They were constantly moving. To split up all the cavalry within 5 miles of the city was not possible. As such, the first to charge out were Lu Duo and Zamubala. Zamubala was one of Sud Khan's generals, while Lu Duo was a general that Fan Yuhai had personally trained. The two of them each brought 5,000 cavalry and guarded the left and right sides of the army. Within the army, Fan Yuhai's gaze had already landed on the city gates many times. However, he still did not see Agar Dorji's subordinates come out. He could not help but sigh as he said viciously, "Since you want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, don't blame me for settling the score with you after this." At this moment, Fan Yuhai had already developed a killing intent towards Agar Dorji. The two of them were not familiar with each other, and it was only because they wanted to integrate better that Fan Yuhai acted like he was inferior. He even expressed that he was willing to respect Agar Dorji, which was why he joined this alliance. However, right now, he had already gained Sud Khan's trust. Since that was the case, the stepping stone from before was no longer of any use, and it did not matter if he threw it to the side or stepped on it again. Although his heart was filled with killing intent, his expression did not change at all. Fan Yuhai raised his head and looked at the mercenaries in green uniforms 5 miles away. He raised his right hand and said, "Sound the drums." The left and right sides send out 1,000 cavalry each to test the waters. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the drums shook the heavens, and every beat seemed to be able to strike one's heart, causing one's heart to swell with excitement. Under the sound of the drums, 2,000 Mongol cavalry slowly came out from the left and right sides, advancing step by step. Order Captain Windchaser and Captain Su He to send out 1,000 cavalry each to engage the enemy. Tell them that this young master will be watching over them and waiting to give them rewards. Yang Chendong looked at the number of enemy troops and his expression was calm. Since the enemy had only sent out 2,000 cavalry, there was no need for them to use their guns. They would just have a battle of cavalry against cavalry. Chapter 829. Yang Chendong knew that this was just a test between the two sides. If he didn't even dare to fight with such a small amount of cavalry, it was inevitable that the morale of the army would be affected. Thinking of all the things that would happen next, if the morale of the army was affected now, then it would be even more difficult to handle. Rather than anything else, it was better to fight with the enemy and have a good start. The flag-bearer conveyed Yang Chendong's order. After Zhui Feng and Su He saw the order clearly, they were extremely excited. This was the best opportunity to show off in front of the sixth young master. Usually, this was something that couldn't be obtained even if one begged for it. Now, they finally had the chance to show it off. Immediately, the two regimental commanders became the leaders of the vanguard without hesitation. Then, they chose 1,000-strong cavalry warriors. When the enemy was 2 miles away, they also slowly moved forward on their horses. "Comrades, the god of war is looking at us from behind. The opportunity is in front of you. How you want to perform depends on everyone. When you attack later, don't hold back. You have to show the military might of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. Do you understand?" While riding forward slowly, Zhui Feng, as the regimental commander, gave everyone a mental preparation. Ba Tu, who had just performed a meritorious service, was in the cavalry regiment and was selected to be in the first 1,000 cavalry camp. He had once saved the life of Deng Yu, a battalion commander, on the battlefield. Because of his bravery, he was chosen by the regimental commander, Zhui Feng, and became the platoon commander of the 1st Company. At this time, Ba Tu didn't come alone. He brought a row of soldiers with him. At this time, his heart was surging. He knew that this was the time for him to show off. Thinking about how his family had changed because he had joined the mercenary army, and how he had found his life's work, his eyes were filled with an incomparably resolute fighting spirit. "Comrades, this is our chance to show off. The god of war is looking at us. All our comrades are also looking at us. Our families in the beginning city are also looking at us. Then we can't let them down. In a while, when the battle starts, everyone will charge together with me. With the tip of the arrow, we will charge into the enemy camp. After we kill our way into the enemy's camp, we will follow the 3-3 battle strategy that we usually train in. Everyone will support each other and kill the enemy with ease. Kill them all." A platoon of 29 warriors said in a low voice. However, it was precisely this kind of muffled sound that was able to suppress everyone's killing intent and ensure that when the battle broke out later, they would be able to display astonishing strength. Not only Ba Tu's platoon, but the other dozens of platoons were also secretly accumulating their strength and suppressing their killing intent, waiting for the moment to erupt. Time continued to pass, and the distance between the cavalry of the two armies continued to shrink. When the distance between the two sides was less than 2 miles, the generals of both sides gave the order for the entire army to charge. Charging 1 mile each was the minimum for the cavalry to charge. If they were any closer, they would not be able to display the flying ability of their warhorses. Both sides charged at pretty much the same time. The ground trembled at that moment, and the sounds of killing filled the ears of the 1st Cavalry. The distance of 1 mile was completed in a dozen breaths of time. Then, there was a flash of blade light and people flew about. Windchaser was at the front. He held a sharp saber and wore a black cape. He was like a black whirlwind as he charged at the front of the 1,000 cavalry. On both sides of his body, there were over 100 riders following him. Under the leadership of this tip of the arrow, they were like a sharp knife, stabbing straight into the enemy's heart. With a move of Windchaser, around 100 meters away from him, tip of the arrow had already formed. They were either made up of 100 men in a company or 30 men in a platoon. They formed into arrows of various sizes, stabbing into the Mongol cavalry that were also charging. Using the speed of the warhorse, the sharpness of the saber, and his exquisite equestrian skills, the moment Windchaser charged into the enemy cavalry, he began to kill them. His arduous training of slashing out 1,000 saber strikes every day had finally paid off. Under the constant slashing of the saber, enemy cavalry after enemy cavalry were chopped off their horses. Their heads flew into the air one after another. Blood splattered into the air, showing the cruelty and cold-bloodedness of the battlefield. Windchaser's figure pierced in like a knife, quickly taking away a few lives. He also made a deep hole in the enemy's cavalry formation, allowing more soldiers to pour in and display their strength. In the next moment, Ba Tu and the others, who were half a beat slower, finally caught up with the enemy. Then they followed suit and charged straight in. When the power of the tip of the arrow reached its maximum limit, the enemy cavalry finally began to fall into chaos. They had only sent out 1,000 cavalry. Logically speaking, they should have gathered all these forces together to form a cohesive formation to charge in. This was the way of cavalry. The facts had already proven that the strength of the cavalry came from the might of their phalanxes and from their repeated charges. In such an environment, even if one's strength was extraordinary and could kill 1, 10, or even 100, could one fight 1,000 alone? If one could not do it or was slightly disappointed, then it would be time for one's heart to be pierced by 10,000 blades. That was why a cavalry charge was never the time to be a hero. If someone did that, they would be surrounded by 10,000 cavalry. Then, when there were enemies all around them, apart from 10,000 blades piercing through the heart, there was no other outcome. This kind of thinking had already been deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. It was precisely because of this that they were unable to adapt to the mercenaries' sudden change in tactics. They had originally been waiting for their companions to gather around them so that they could form a joint attack. Only now did they realize that they had been defeated one by one. Not only that, but the mercenaries' tip of the arrow was not just a single group. It was divided into more than 10 groups, attacking from different directions. It gave off a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere. The tip of the arrow formation was a cavalry killing formation that Yang Chendong had created himself after summing up the experience of the later generations. Imagining the Sharp Knife Squad, Sharp Knife Platoon, and Sharp Knife Company in the later generations, Yang Chendong thought that he could use this tactic on the battlefield. The so-called Sharp Knife was not the vanguard. The vanguard referred to the team that was the first to receive the enemy and take the lead. However, the Sharp Knife was just like its name. It was a sharp weapon that could pierce deeply into the enemy's heart. It was the kind of weapon that could kill the enemy with one stab. Of course, in order to become the tip of the arrow, there was a very important condition. The person who made the arrow had to be very brave, completely disregarding life and death. Only in this way could he break the enemy's cavalry formation and play the role he was supposed to play. Otherwise, even the tip of the knife would be broken before it entered the enemy's body. Not only would it not be able to display its power, but it would also cause the warriors behind it to become ownerless and eventually be scattered and killed one by one. It was not easy to find the tip of the arrow, at least for most of the Mongolian cavalry. However, this problem was not a big deal in Yang Chendong's eyes. This was because he had a lot of wealth that the grassland people could not compare to, as well as advanced weapons that other armies could not compare to. Ever since he returned to the beginning city this time, he began to advocate the combat method of the tip of the arrow. In order to achieve his goal, he offered very generous conditions. Once he passed the assessment and became the tip of the arrow, he would be able to receive double the reward of his other comrades. Not only that, he would also receive a set of bulletproof vest that protected his upper body to ensure that he could minimize his losses on the battlefield. This bulletproof vest was naturally not as powerful as the one in the big warehouse, nor was it as effective as the bulletproof vest worn by Yang Chendong. It was just a piece of clothing that looked like a horse clip. There were 2 steel plates and a lot of cotton in it. Even so, it was not a problem for it to deal with ordinary swords. With the generous rewards in front of them and the equipment that was enough to protect themselves, there was an endless stream of warriors who signed up to join the assessment of the tip of the arrow. Speaking of which, the people of this era were not afraid of death. They were just afraid that their deaths would not be worth it. Just based on the fact that the mercenary army had an extremely comprehensive pension policy for the dead warriors, especially the dead warriors who had rendered meritorious service, it was already worth many people to risk their lives. Once they died in battle, their families would benefit. There would be many people who would remember their good deeds. It was worth it to come to this world. It was far better than the other Mongolian soldiers. When people died, they died. No one would take a second look at them. Once they did not die and made meritorious service, the generous rewards would come. Not to say that they would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives, but at least they could live a stable life for many years. It was worth it no matter how one looked at it. Yang Chendong had always been very generous to the soldiers who went to the battlefield to kill the enemy. These people were fighting with their lives on the line. Based on this, they should be able to obtain even more. It was precisely because of this generous policy that the mercenary army could often fight 1 against 2, or even 1 against 5, or 1 against 10. Under the stimulation, the tactic of the tip of the arrow was formed. It was the first time it was used on the battlefield. The facts also proved that this method was feasible. You were like the strongest tip of the arrow. Windchaser was the first to charge into the enemy formation. Although he could not avoid being stabbed many times, with the protection of the bulletproof vest, he did not suffer much damage. On the other hand, the enemy was completely stunned by this tactic. When the tip of the arrow charged into their formation, chaos finally appeared. The strength of cavalry lay in their formation. Only then could they form an advantageous charge and cause damage to the enemy. If both sides were cavalrymen, whichever side panicked first would be the first to lose. Chapter 830. The formation could no longer display the strength that it should have. Under the constant barrage of arrows, the Mongol cavalry became scattered soldiers one after another. Without anyone protecting the left and right wings, they were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Often, before they could even charge out for dozens of meters, blood splattered all over their bodies, and they were either injured or killed. In comparison, the Windchaser cavalry with the tip of the arrows were like nails that had sunk into the enemy camp. They scattered the enemy and killed them one by one. Even if some of the soldiers had temporarily lost contact with their troops, they still had the 3-3 tactic. As long as there were 3 cavalrymen, they would be able to display the might of a small charging formation. Even if there were 10 cavalrymen, they would be able to hold on for a while. If there were too few opponents, then the saber would fall and the person would die. There would be no victory. On the other side, the Tatar cavalry commander Su he had also become the tip of the arrow. In terms of individual strength, he was not weaker than Windchaser and was even stronger. He led the Tatar cavalry and charged forward. It was as if they had entered a place where no one could stop them. They killed group after group of Mongol cavalry and continued to expand the battle results. Beat the gong to retreat. Fan Yuhai, who was riding on the horse, had a deep gaze. If one looked closely, one could see the shock in his eyes. Seeing that there were not many cavalrymen left and that they did not have the strength to attack anymore, he quickly gave the order to retreat. The Mongol cavalry who were lucky enough to survive on the battlefield felt like they had been pardoned. When they heard the sound of the gong, they quickly retreated from the battlefield. However, even the formation had been broken, so how could it be so easy for them to escape? In the process of retreating, not only did they have to endure the harassment of the mercenaries, but they also had to endure the pain of arrows when they finally managed to kill their way out of the formation. As they retreated, at least 100 cavalrymen were shot by arrows. Their fleeing horses fell to their deaths, dying on the path of hope that they had seen. In the end, less than 500 of the 2,000 cavalrymen that they sent out returned. Furthermore, almost all of them were injured, and their faces were filled with fear. Just this battle alone had broken the morale of some of the soldiers. No one could guarantee that such people would not go all out if they were sent to the battlefield again. In comparison, the Tatar regiment only suffered less than 100 casualties. Most of them were injured, and most of them had minor injuries. After some bandaging, they could quickly return to the battlefield. This was the strength of the mercenary army. Of course, the strength of the tip of the arrow was due to the strength of the formation, and of course, it was because most of the people sent this time were veterans and people who were good at fighting. However, the victory was right in front of everyone's eyes, and no one could question it. Fortunately, this was a fighting force formed by veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. Fortunately, there was a certain proportion of new recruits and captive soldiers in the opposing mercenary army. Otherwise, if this battle continued, there would be no hope for them. Zhui Feng and Su He brought their troops back. What welcomed them were the cheers and congratulations of their comrades. For a moment, the two commanders and the soldiers who had followed them to battle all had happy expressions. At this moment, Yang Chendong's voice sounded out from the white dragon horse. Those who have done well in battle will be remembered. When we return, we will reward them greatly. Mighty war god! Mighty war god! Immediately, loud cheers resounded across the land. Not long later, the cheers grew louder and louder. Not only were the veterans cheering, even the new recruits who had just joined the army a few days ago, as well as the captives who had just been transferred from the construction team to the army, were all cheering loudly. At this moment, they were quickly assimilating into the mercenary army. They were experiencing what it meant to share glory and loss. When the shouts reached the other side, the expressions of the Mongol cavalry became very ugly. Before, there were some people who had looked down on the Mongol cavalry because of the Battle of Yendu a few days ago. They thought that the legendary powerful mercenary army was only SOSO. However, after witnessing this scene, they quickly closed their mouths. In comparison, they knew just how lucky and difficult their previous victory was. Of course, there were also quite a few generals who turned to look at Fan Yuhai, who was riding on his horse with an unchanging expression. In the previous battle, it was because they had listened to his suggestion that they were able to heavily injure the mercenary army. Now that the war god had personally appeared, they hoped that their general would be able to come up with a better plan. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change, but great waves had already risen in his heart. He had exchanged blows with Yang Chendong before, both directly and indirectly. However, that was only a battle of infantry. Yang Chendong had relied on his long-range firearms. However, the battle in front of him was completely a head-on clash. They had lost so badly and so quickly, which was out of his expectations. However, a famous general was a famous general. Fan Yuhai would not be discouraged because of a momentary defeat. He looked at the mercenary army on the other side and had a new plan in his heart. In the end, they had too few people. Moreover, the ratio of veterans was too low. This was their weakness. In a small-scale battle, they might be able to rely on this advantage to win, but what about a large-scale battle? Even if the casualty ratio was 1, 2, or even higher, he could still afford it. On the other hand, the mercenary army would not be able to take it. Once that happened, it would be time for him to counterattack. Pass down the order. Send out 5,000 cavalry from each side. Charge. The thought flashed through his mind and turned into words as Fan Yuhai spat them out. When Lu Duo and Zamubala heard this order, they were first stunned. Then, they understood what the general meant. They immediately cupped their fists and went to mobilize the cavalry. Sud Khan handed over the command of the battlefield to Fan Yuhai, giving him the authority to mobilize more than 40,000 soldiers. It was just 5,000 men from each side, so it was not a big deal. In just an hour, the cavalry was mobilized. Then, under the leadership of their respective generals, they slowly moved forward. Through the binoculars, Yang Chendong saw everything that the Mongol cavalry were doing. He laughed. Inform everyone to defend. Once the enemy charges into the range of the firearms, there is no need to be polite. If the enemy retreats, the cavalry will charge and use arrows to greet them. Fan Yuhai wanted to use the human wave tactic to exhaust him to death. This was indeed a good move. However, It also depended on whether Yang Chendong was willing to play with him. Since he had the advantage of the firearms, why not use it? Only a fool would engage you in a one-on-one battle. Previously, he had exchanged a move with you just to raise the morale of the troops. Since he had reached his goal, it was time to toy with the enemy. The flag waved. The officers who were waiting to be called out had no choice but to suppress their desire to charge forward and fight a good battle. Instead, they began to quietly watch the performance of the musketeers. Of course, it was not that they did not do anything. Instead, they ordered their soldiers to prepare their bows. The moment the enemy retreated, they would chase after them and beat them down. Within Yunde city, the news of the Mongol army's defeat had spread throughout the city. It was obvious that some people were shocked, while others lowered their heads and shook their heads. Hararuo intentionally walked around the streets, then returned to his father's temporary residence with a face full of excitement. The moment he entered, he shouted, "Father, Father, that traitorous Fan Yuhai lost. I knew it. Who does he think he is? How could he be a match for the war god?" In his heart, Halaruo naturally hated Yang Chendong. If not for this person, he might have already become the son-in-law of the Mongol tribe. However, the hatred he had for Fan Yuhai was not small either. Although Fan Yuhai had never said that he was Agar Dorji's subordinate, in the eyes of this father and son pair, they had always thought so. Now that the two enemies were fighting, no matter who won or lost, it was something they were happy to see. In the courtyard, Agar Dorji was basking in the sun. He sat on a chair with a relaxed expression. Although there was a great battle going on outside, Agar Dorji wasn't worried at all. Even if the sky fell, there would be someone higher to hold it up. On the contrary, he was waiting for Sud Khan to beg him to send troops. When that time came, he would definitely ask for an exorbitant price. Seeing his ugly son yelling and screaming as he entered the courtyard, Agar Dorji shook his head helplessly. His son wasn't very capable, but his temper wasn't small. He really didn't know how his son was going to survive if he wasn't around one day. Halu Ru'a seemed to only want to vent his feelings. He didn't insist on his father responding to his shouts. Seeing that he had achieved his goal, he turned and left. "Father, if there's nothing else, I'm going to find some fun. Staying in this courtyard is really annoying." The so-called fun was naturally looking for women. Mu Ren, the original general of the city, had escaped. However, many of the citizens did not escape with him. The previous fire had only burned down the east of the city, and the other 3 cities were not affected. Not only that, some industries did not only survive, but because there were close to 60,000 Mongol cavalry in the city, some industries became even more lively than before. The fun that Halaruo wanted to find was naturally the matter between men and women. He knew that his son was too ugly and had not married yet. In this aspect, Agar Dorji had always allowed him to do as he wished. However, considering that the city wasn't very safe, he still nodded lightly to the guard captain beside him. A group of 10 guards followed him out of the residence. They were going to protect the young master's safety. However, what they did not know was that when Halaruo walked on the streets, behind him and his guards, someone was watching everything closely. Chapter 8:31. Fan Yuhai rode on his horse and stood outside the city. Before he left, he had already thought about the safety of the city. Hence, he had left his trusted aide, Zhang Meng, by Sud Khan's side to prevent any accidents from happening. As for Agar Dorji and his son, he had only sent people to keep an eye on them to prevent them from causing trouble. This pair of father and son did not pique Fan Yuhai's interest, but the 15,000 cavalrymen under his command were something he was determined to obtain. He was even prepared to take over this force at any time. From this, it could be seen that this person had a grand plan. Outside the city, there were 5,000 Mongol cavalry on the left and right. A total of 10,000 Mongol cavalry had attacked. By the time they reached the center of the battlefield, they didn't see any reaction from the mercenaries. They did not send out their cavalry like they did at the start. This made the generals who were leading the cavalry feel confused. However, the beating of the drums did not stop, so their army could not stop. As such, they whipped their horses and charged forward. It was only a distance of 3 miles, but the cavalry charged forward for more than 2 miles. Just when they were 1 mile away from the mercenary camp, gunshots suddenly rang out. Pa-pa-pa. The gunshots did not stop, and the Mongol cavalry at the front fell off their horses like dumplings. 6 battalions, a total of 2,400 musketeers, squatted in front of the mercenary cavalry like a long snake, forming an impenetrable net of fire. Enemies within 500 meters were shot down one by one. The cavalry was very fast, and it should not be easy for the musketeers to hit a fast-moving target. However, there were too many enemies, and it could be described as a dense swarm. With such a formation, even a blind man would have a 90% chance of hitting the enemy. Not to mention, these 6 battalions had been trained for a long time. The gunshots were dense like firecrackers, and the response was that there were Mongol cavalry who fell off their horses at every second. As the numbers accumulated, more and more enemies died on the battlefield. Fan Yuhai, who was standing at the rear, couldn't help but feel heartache when he saw this scene. He knew more about guns than any of the Mongol cavalry generals, and that was why he knew how terrifying they were. Back then, wasn't the mighty Jiaoji kingdom defeated by such firearms? At that time, even the elephant soldiers could not gain the slightest advantage, let alone the charging Mongolian cavalry. The sounds of gunfire continued, and more Mongolian cavaliers died, but they were about to close the distance of 1 mile. At this moment, within the mercenary army, the sound of the bugle of charge rang out. Toot 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 toot. The loud and clear sound stimulated the adrenaline in the human body, causing every soldier to have the urge to jump on their horses and raise their whips to go on a killing spree. Charge! Tiger's Mane, who was riding on his horse and wearing a white cloak, let out a loud roar. Then he raised his saber and was the first to rush forward. Now he urgently needed a great victory to prove himself and wash away the shame of his previous defeat. With Tiger's Mane's shout, the various divisions and regiments all moved. In an instant, over 10,000 cavalry jumped out and swarmed over, shocking the Mongol cavalry. Retreat, retreat. Seeing that the situation was not good, Fan Yuhai immediately gave the order to retreat. Immediately, the sound of the gong sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry who did not know what to do immediately turned around and ran. Their reaction was not slow, especially since Fan Yuhai's order was very timely, so they should be able to retreat safely. However, Yang Qindong had already given the order to make preparations. When Tiger's Man and the others charged, they raised their sabers as a feint. Seeing that the Mongol cavalry wanted to turn around and leave, they all picked up their sabers and chased after the Mongol cavalry and shot at them. The prepared bows and arrows shot out and landed among the Mongol cavalry. With a series of pai li pala sounds, over 1,000 Mongol cavalry were shot down from their horses, either dead or injured. This chase lasted for 3 miles. Only when they were in front of the enemy and under the city walls did the signal to retreat sound out. Immediately, the 10,000 mercenary cavalry received the order and retreated in an orderly manner. This caused Fan Yuhai, who was waiting for a chance to counterattack, to be disappointed once more. When the mercenary army retreated, there was no chaos at all. It was as if they had rehearsed this a long time ago. Whoever retreated first would stay behind to cover for them. Even if he sent out the cavalry now, he would not be able to gain any benefits. Furthermore, most of the cavalry were still in the city and had not been sent out. Even if he wanted to move them out, he would need time. This was the disadvantage of having a small city. Outside of the city, there was no way they could fit 60,000 troops. This was probably one of the reasons why Yang Qindong dared to bring his troops over to provoke them. The sky slowly darkened. In the second battle, they had not injured the enemy, but they had lost another 3,000 men. Adding everything together, they had lost close to 5,000 men. Retreat, all of you back into the city. At night, we need to tighten the defense and prevent the enemy from attacking at night. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change as he said to Lu Duo and Kamiba. After that, he rode into the city and headed straight for Sud Khan's residence. When Fan Yuhai saw Sud Khan, he reported everything that had happened today. He was already prepared to be scolded. However, unexpectedly, Sud Khan did not scold him and only nodded. And the losses were not big. Have you figured out the situation of the war god? Fan Yuhai pondered for a moment before replying in a deep voice, "It's about time. The other party has too few soldiers. If we really fight, the one who loses will definitely be him. Therefore, he should only be trying to intimidate us. As long as we don't move out, the other party won't be able to take advantage of us and will naturally retreat." Good, then I'll leave everything to General Fan. Against the war god, being able to defend the city without losing is already a great achievement. After all, this person is too famous. Even if you want to defeat him, it won't be done in a day. Suda actually tried to persuade him instead. Fan Yuhai immediately revealed a very moved expression and said, "Yes, this subordinate will remember." Suda's generosity was partly due to his appreciation of Fan Yuhai's ability. More importantly, the cavalry that died today were not his direct subordinates, nor were they the elites of the Mongolian tribes in Mo Bay. People like them might have been herders yesterday, but today, they had become soldiers. There were many people like them in Mo Bay, so the loss of a few would not be a heartache. Fan Yuhai naturally saw this point as well. That was why he sent the cavalry that were not strong to test the enemy. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he did things appropriately. The Mongol army retreated back into the city, and the mercenaries cheered as they set up camp. They even lit up a huge bonfire. Under the light of the fire, be it the veterans, captives, or new recruits, everyone had a victorious smile on their faces. Today's 2 victories gave them great confidence. They were filled with trust towards the war god. They believed that under the leadership of the war god, victory would belong to them. Outside the central tent, there were many people moving around. 2 guards had switched positions to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. In the tent, Tiger's Mane stood in front of Yang Chendong and flattered him. Or rather, it could be said that he was not flattering, but speaking the truth. "Young master, you're just too amazing. Your formation at the tip of the arrows caused them to not know what to do. Using the musketeers against the cavalry, you used silence to stop them, effectively avoiding all sorts of problems when shooting while moving. If this goes on, before long, we'll be able to take down these Mongolian soldiers and wipe away the shame." Tiger's Mane was still speaking excitedly as if he was saying something great. However, Yang Chendong suddenly raised his head. "Do you really think that with our current formation, we can destroy the 60,000 Mongol soldiers in front of us?" "Ah." Tiger's Mane was stunned by this sudden question. He stood there not knowing what to do. After being stunned for a long time, he did not know how to reply. Fortunately, Yang Chendong did not intend to make things difficult for him. He quickly answered his own question. "The enemy has 60,000 soldiers, and we only have 10,000. Moreover, there are many new soldiers and captives who have not fully adapted to our military rules. Relying on this force to defeat the Mongol army is completely impossible." It was not that it was impossible, but it was completely impossible. Just from this sentence, one could see that Yang Chendong's mind was still very clear. Then he said, "The only reason we were able to obtain victory today was because the old soldiers and musketeers displayed enough advantages. If the 2 sides really fought, then the loser would definitely be us." This is impossible," Tiger's Mane said in disbelief. "Nothing is impossible. Tiger's Mane, as a general, the most important thing is to understand the situation and size up the situation. Doing something despite knowing that it is impossible is definitely not something a general of an army should do. It is merely the bravery of an ignorant person." Yang Chendong's expression did not change as he continued to speak in an extremely calm manner. This time, Tiger's Mane's expression changed again and again. He thought back to the defeat last time. It was because he underestimated the enemy and did not fully understand the enemy's situation before sending out his troops. In the end, he caused a huge defeat, causing the strength of the mercenary army to be greatly reduced. The 6th young master had no choice but to personally go into battle. Seeing the sudden change in Hu Mang's expression, Yang Chendong sighed softly in his heart. He spoke up once again, "I have no intention of blaming you. In the previous battle, The army was defeated. Although you, as the main general, have to bear some responsibility, how many of the regiment commanders below you used their brains? They were all blinded by victory and thought that the mercenary army was truly invincible. Did they think that the moment the army appeared, the enemy would flee at the mere sight of it? They did not think about it. The Mongols have ruled here for so many years. How could they be so easy to deal with? If that was the case, the great Ming dynasty would not have sent out so many times and returned in defeat. Failure is not scary. What is scary is not knowing how you lost. That is a person who cannot be saved. Do you understand? Chapter 8:32. Hearing Yang Chendong's words, Tiger's Mane quickly replied, "Yes, young master. We have already summarized our experience. If we don't understand the situation clearly, we won't easily send out troops again. I can promise you this." Yang Chendong's expression became a little better. Since they had already lost the previous battle, there was no point in dwelling on this matter. As long as the military commanders had learned their lesson and would not repeat the same mistake, the soldiers who had died in battle would be able to rest in peace. Sometimes, losing a battle wasn't scary. On the road to growth, encountering defeat was also a kind of harvest. It was a prerequisite for becoming stronger. As long as the heart didn't lose after a defeat, they could still have the heart to fight again. Moreover, the more they fought, the braver they became. Okay, you can go first. Take care of your own camp. In the next 2 days, we will only surround and not attack. Facing the enemy's challenge, we may even retreat to make concessions. At that time, the morale of the army cannot be shaken. You can go and discuss with the battalion commanders what to do. Yes, go and call over Zhui Feng of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. Yang Chendong raised the cup of hot tea in front of him and lightly waved his hand. Tiger's Mane was the first person he met. He definitely wouldn't be the last. He was making preparations for the following arrangements. There were some things he needed to explain to the commanders. Tiger's Mane left. Not long after, Zhui Feng entered the main tent. After staying for half an hour, he left with his head held high. One by one, the commanders entered the main tent. Every one of them had a private conversation with the 6th young master for half an hour or more. That night, the main tent was lit with oil lamps. It was only when the sun was about to rise that it was extinguished. When the sun rose, the various armies began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals from the chimneys. The fragrance quickly spread everywhere. The army was a scene of bustling activity. 2 hours later, the two armies that had eaten their fill began a new day of confrontation. In front of the city, Fan Yuhai rode out. This time, the cavalry behind him was even larger. From afar, the number of people had already reached 20,000. Facing a mercenary army, especially one that was personally led by a war god, from Fan Yuhai's point of view, even if the entire army moved out, it wouldn't be excessive. The cavalry formed a formation of 1,000 men, and they quickly got into formation. Following Fan Yuhai's shout, 1,000 men charged out of the camp. The one leading them was Zamubala, the valiant general of the Mongol tribe in the north of the Gobi Desert. After Zamubala appeared, he led this 1,000-man team and charged towards the mercenaries. When they were about a kilometer away, he suddenly stopped. Countless experiences and facts had told them that this distance was relatively safe. Zambala, who had stopped his horse, began to challenge the mercenary general. He looked like he wanted to have a one-on-one battle with the mercenary general. 1 versus 1. This kind of battle strategy was used in the ancient times, had been past since ancient times. This was especially true for cavalry. They paid particular attention to the tightness of the battle formation and the momentum of the charge. With just one man and one general, the effect that they could exert was already very limited. A battle strategy like 1 versus 1 had not appeared in a long time. But today, it appeared in front of two armies. Many people's faces were filled with confusion. Then, some of the generals' faces were filled with excitement. It seemed like this was the time for them to display their individual strength and gain merit. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, had a calm expression. It was as if he didn't see the other party's actions. He didn't move. This caused many people to retract their gazes. They were originally waiting for the war god to pick their generals. But when they saw that the war god didn't move, they didn't dare to look. But there were still some brave ones who carefully spoke to their comrades. "What's going on? Is the war god not letting us fight?" "Quiet, it's forbidden to make noise in the camp." The moment the soldiers below moved, the regiment commander standing at the front of the group immediately stopped them. A few battalion commanders also cooperated and persuaded the soldiers below, suppressing the discussion. The various divisions and regiments were all like this. Yang Chendong saw this from the corner of his eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. The results of last night's discussion were pretty good. At least the regimental commanders understood his intentions. With their suppression, the army probably wouldn't fall into chaos, but their morale would definitely drop. But this was something that couldn't be helped. The difference in numbers was too great. In order to launch the final attack, they couldn't afford to lose any of their forces. Speaking of which, last night, Yang Chendong had already thought of a countermeasure for Fan Yuhai. If the two sides' roles were reversed, he would have at least two paths to take. The first was to use the strength of the army and use the advantage of numbers to launch a fierce attack. For example, he could directly send 30,000 soldiers and then send 10,000 soldiers behind to launch an all-out attack, using the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy. In the face of tens of thousands of enemy cavalry, even the strength of a flintlock was limited. Once they charged over, the effect of the flintlocks would be limited and it would be difficult to win this battle. Of course, if he decided to do this, he would have to pay a heavy price. From this point of view, the possibility of Fan Yuhai's choice was relatively low. After all, he only had 15,000 men under his command. He could wipe out his own army, but if he really wiped out the cavalry of the Sud Khan, the Khan would definitely not do it. If the first point didn't work, then there was only the second point left. That was to send out a small portion of the army to challenge and slowly nibble away at the strength of the mercenaries. Using small victories to accumulate a big victory, then expanding the results of the battle. The advantage of doing this was that not only would they not lose too much, but they could also continuously reduce the strength of the mercenaries. And when the number of mercenaries was reduced to a certain extent, it would be time to implement the first plan. At that time, if the number of mercenaries was too low, facing tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, they could only run. These were the two methods that Yang Chendong thought of for Fan Yuhai. Looking at it now, the other party had indeed thought the same and sent out a 1,000-man team to challenge them. A 1,000-man team was naturally not scary. Yang Chendong could casually send out a commander or even a battalion commander to lead a 1,000-man team. With the sharpness of the arrows and the sharpness of the cavalry swords, they could win. But this kind of victory was impossible without paying a price. If 100 men died in one battle, then 1,000 men would have to pay 10 times the price. As time passed, the mercenaries would definitely be the first to be unable to bear it. Not to mention, in a 10,000-man team, there were only a few veterans. Once the battle was over, their effective fighting strength would be worn out by the challenges one after another. How would they have any strength left to launch an all-out attack? Thus, the best way to deal with this kind of challenge was to ignore it and act as if he didn't see it. And with the huge range of the firearms, the other party would naturally be helpless. The only drawback was that in the long run, the morale of the soldiers would definitely take a big hit. This was the biggest test for the mercenaries. Seeing through the other party's intentions, Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't let them succeed. Thus, there was the current strategy of not moving to deal with the changes. Zamubala, who was 1,000 meters away, had already prepared himself for a battle. However, when he realized that there was no movement from the other party after half a day, he thought of Fan Yuhai's instructions and immediately started cursing. He cursed and scolded, calling him a coward, a pussy, and so on. In the end, it was all kinds of insults. What was even more impressive was that Fan Yuhai seemed to have been prepared for this. He even found a cavalryman who could speak Mandarin. While cursing in Mongolian, he also spoke Mandarin. When his voice echoed throughout the land, one could imagine how ugly the mercenaries' expressions were. Battalion commander, I request to fight. Battalion Commander, I also request to fight. Even if I die on the battlefield, I can't let them humiliate us like this. Yes, we request to fight. Under the scolding, some of the more impulsive soldiers couldn't hold it in anymore. Their faces turned red as they shouted with a belly full of anger. All of you shut up. All the battalion commanders had been called by their regiment commander for a meeting last night. Naturally, they knew what to do. Although they were also very angry in the face of such a situation and even wanted to rush forward with their swords, they couldn't go against military orders. They could only obey. With the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, although many of the soldiers were a little emotional, it didn't cause any chaos. Under the scolding, many of the soldiers had no choice but to shut up. But from their angry faces, they only obeyed the orders and didn't understand it in their hearts. After a round of scolding, Zamubala retreated with some disappointment. In return, an unknown young general appeared with 1,000 men. They still had the appearance of a challenge. After not getting a reply for a long time, a new round of scolding began. Naturally, it attracted a wave of dissatisfaction from the warriors and their requests for battle. Just like that, the cycle repeated again and again. The dissatisfaction of the mercenaries grew stronger and stronger. However, under the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, no one dared to go against military orders. But at this moment, the morale of the soldiers had started to drop, and it continued to drop. The sky was finally turning dark, and the Mongol cavalry also started to retreat. One by one, they retreated back into the city. The mercenaries also started to set up camp. Hot meals were sent to the soldiers, but for some reason, most of them did not have any appetite. It was obvious that everything that happened today had made them very depressed, and they were very stifled by their anger. At night, after the soldiers went into their tents to rest, some of the battalion commanders finally couldn't take it anymore and stood up. They went in front of their regiment commander and asked for instructions on what to do next. There were also some battalion commanders who expressed their worries. Based on their thoughts, could they ask for instructions from the war god to fight a few battles tomorrow? If not, the morale of the soldiers would drop too quickly and it wouldn't be easy to lead the troops. The oil lamp in Yang Chendong's main tent was still lit. Yang Chendong closed his eyes and wore a large cloak as he sat on a chair beside the stove. But even until dawn, he didn't see any regiment commander come forward to request to fight. Chapter 8:33. When the sky started to brighten, Yang Chendong, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He then chuckled and muttered to himself, "Not bad, not bad." Tiger's Mane and the other commanders did not come to complain to him. This proved that they could still control the army. Just based on this point, he was not disappointed. But after laughing, Yang Chendong looked outside the tent that was already bright and couldn't help but shake his head. Today is also a difficult day. Just as they had expected, after both sides got into formation again, the Mongolian cavalry's challenge began again. Just like yesterday, there were still groups of 1,000 men walking out. They were shouting and cursing, and all sorts of insults were thrown out. Those insults were as unpleasant as they could be, and once again, it caused the soldiers below to angrily rebuke and request for a fight. In fact, it was even louder than yesterday. Left with no choice, the battalion commanders had to order a few of the shouting soldiers to be captured and brought into the tent. Only then did they suppress the soldiers' anger. However, anyone could tell that this was just a stopgap measure and not the final solution to the problem. On the contrary, if they captured too many of these people, the ones left would probably be a bunch of weaklings. If these soldiers were to be used as the main force to kill the enemy, their might would be weakened by 30%. Below the city walls, Fan Yuhai looked at all of this with great interest. He was in a good mood. In this battle, the mercenaries had too obvious a weakness, and that was that they had too few soldiers. After finding this weakness, he used the tactic of 1,000-men battle in order to continuously grind the enemy's military strength. Once the enemy's military strength was reduced by half, it would be time for him to attack. He never thought that the mercenaries would be so tolerant. This was indeed out of Fan Yuhai's expectations, but it also made him very happy. One had to know that not everyone dared to insult the mercenaries in front of them. Since he was able to do so, wasn't it already considered as proving his strength? More importantly, under this kind of cursing, the morale of the mercenaries would definitely drop very quickly. If he did not control it well, it was possible for the army to mutiny. Even if they managed to control the situation by force, as time passed, the morale of the army would drop. Could such an army still win the war? Fan Yuhai was happy to wait. He wanted to see how long the mercenaries could last. As long as they showed any signs of weakness, he would definitely launch a fierce attack. At that time, he would become the first general to defeat the war god. What's the situation in the city? While Fan Yuhai was enjoying the cursing of his own soldiers, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Deputy General Lu Duo beside him. "General, the situation in the city is normal." Lu Duo replied. Then, as if he understood Fan Yuhai's worries, he smiled and said, "General, don't worry. Although the defense of Jiangdu City is very tight, the mercenaries will not have any chance to steal the city." "Yes, I'm not worried about them stealing the city. I'm worried about other things that we don't know about," Fan Yuhai said in a deep voice. Could it be that the mercenaries were here to scare them? Did they want to scare them away and regain their face? Once they couldn't scare them, they could only hold on like this. But this didn't seem like the style of the war god. But if there was another purpose, what could it be? Fan Yuhai couldn't figure it out. The only thing he could do was to complete the task at hand. Send someone to inform Zhang Meng and ask him to pay more attention to the situation in the city. Also, ask him to protect Sade Khan. We must not give Agadorji any opportunity. Fan Yuhai couldn't think of what else the mercenaries might do. He could only order Lu Duo. What he didn't know was that there was a saying in ancient times to take the head of a general from an army of 10,000. There was also a term in later generations called Operation Decapitation. Operation Decapitation was the real purpose of Yang Qindong this time. The soldiers outside the city were all serving this military goal and mission. As early as when the Wolf Fang Special Forces was just established, one of the main military tasks that Yang Qindong gave them was to decapitate. The commander was the commander of an army. Once the news was spread, it would completely destroy the other party's command center and will to resist. The image of, to catch bandits, first catch the leader, hit the snake where it hurts, reflected this idea. The elements of Operation Decapitation were speed, accuracy, and cooperation. Even if the number of enemies this time was several times their own, the effect of ordinary means could be too small. Especially with a famous general like Fan Yuhai, it was even more difficult to win with wisdom. Therefore, Operation Decapitation became Yang Qindong's first choice. Compared to the mercenaries who had guns and even cannons, the existence of the Wolf Fang Special Forces was still very secret. It could even be said that it was not known to outsiders. It was precisely because others didn't know that once it was used, the effect would be greater and it would be easier to succeed. If the other party was a large military camp, the commander would be in a military tent protected by layers of military camps. It would be too difficult to carry out Operation Decapitation. But now the enemy was resting in the city, and there were many civilians in it, which created enough conditions for Operation Decapitation. In the military tent of the same army, Yang Qindong changed his seat in front of the sand table. His eyes were fixed on the area marked with Wanda City, and the frequency of his breathing became much slower. "Report," the voice of the first guard Captain Chiovi suddenly came from outside the door. "Sixth young master, Battalion Commander Su Yunxing wants to see you." "Let him in." Hearing this, Yang Qindong leaned back on the chair. He knew that the conditions that should be prepared were sufficient. The next step was to see the performance of Tai Hu, Bai Zhua, and others in the city. Fan Yuhai was very careful. Every night before going to bed, he would walk around the city tower to see the army's night deployment. After making sure that nothing would go wrong, he would leave with satisfaction. But he didn't know that Yang Qindong didn't mean to send the army for a night attack at all. His hope was on the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team that had already entered the city. These two teams had limited personnel, only a few dozen people. If they wanted to enter the city, they wouldn't arouse suspicion at all. Although the 4 gates of Wanda City were closed since the sudden appearance of the mercenaries, in fact, Tai Hu and others had already entered the city a few days ago in disguise. Now they were making all kinds of preparations in the city. If words had to be used to describe it, it was like Sun Wukong who got into the belly of Princess Iron Fan and was ready to make a big scene. Even during the war, there was no curfew in Wanda City. They were different from the Great Ming Dynasty. They never had such a saying and consciousness. Therefore, even though the sky was completely dark and it was already midnight, one could still see some shops on the streets lit up by oil lamps. There were also some figures walking back and forth on the streets from time to time. The Drunken Pleasure House was the largest and the best business in the city. It was also the largest brothel in the city. In a private room, the 2 teams of Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo, who had been dressed up, were drinking here. At the same time, they were also discussing tonight's action. Beside them, 2 women wearing revealing clothes and heavy makeup were sleeping. No one would have thought that in a place like this, there would be people who spent money but didn't buy sex. Not to mention that they were on a mission, and not to mention that these 2 women were too ugly to look at. Their military discipline didn't allow them to do this kind of thing when they were on a mission. So the 2 of them didn't even look at the 2 women who had fainted after drinking the knockout drug. Instead, they lowered their voices and made plans for the night. The army has been out for 3 days. This is the deadline that the 6th young master set for us. We must act tonight. How are the preparations on your side? Bai Zhuo was half lying on the table. He looked at Tai Hu, who was close by, and asked in a low voice. Everything is ready. Skinny Monkey and King Kong are watching that kid. Tai Hu narrowed his eyes, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. Even his murderous aura had been completely concealed. The 6th young master once said that a real assassin wouldn't reveal a trace of murderous aura. If they couldn't do this, then they were unqualified. Now, Tai Hu had entered this realm. Good, then I'll wait for you to make a move. After Bai Zhuo said this, he poured a cup of wine on himself. Then he walked out of the room with a strong smell of alcohol. At this time, the Drunken Pleasure House was the best time to seek pleasure. Rashly leaving would attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. However, the smell of alcohol was completely different. It was the best cover. After Bai Zhuo left, Tai Hu also stood up. Then he put his right hand to his mouth and whistled. Naturally, people with ulterior motives could hear it. However, for those who were drunk, this sound wouldn't attract the slightest bit of attention. They would only think that a wanton person was doing something rash. After the whistle sounded, in the best private room of the Drunken Pleasure House, a man who was sleeping with 2 women in each arm suddenly felt a chill on his neck. Then, a piercing chill rose from his heart. Instinctively, he reached out to grab the dagger under his pillow. Hala, if you're a young master, why struggle? You should know that since I've come here, I naturally won't give you any chance. A skinny man who only weighed about 80 kilograms chuckled, revealing a harmless smile. However, if one looked carefully, it wouldn't be difficult to see that there was a hidden killing intent under his laughter. The person lying on the bed was Hala compared to Fan Yuhai, who was fighting war god outside the city every day. He was cooped up here every day, enjoying what he thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. However, he didn't expect that someone would suddenly appear in front of him. How did he get in? Why didn't the guards outside notice? Chapter 8:34. Questions popped up in his mind one after another, but at this moment, he couldn't think too much because the dagger on his neck had already pierced his skin. The feeling of blood flowing down his skin was like a worm crawling on his skin. Feeling that his life was in danger, Haliruo's face changed. Compared to other people, he was more afraid of death. Especially after enjoying so much in the world, he was even more afraid of death. He was afraid of losing everything. Brother, don't be impulsive. What do you want? Whether it's money or an official position, I can give it to you. Presumably, you already know my identity. I can satisfy you. Seeing Hilaruo's cooperation, Skinny Monkey-like couldn't help but nod. Very good, I like to deal with smart people. Tell me, where's the crude oil in the city, and what's the password for tonight? Crude oil? For you. Haliruo's face changed greatly. Whether the other party wanted money or an official position, he believed that he could satisfy them. But when it came to crude oil, he had to be careful. Because that thing was something that even his father didn't want to provoke. As for the identity of the person who inquired about the crude oil, it seemed like it was about to be revealed. The dagger slid down and suddenly reached the dark fatty's chest. Then it stabbed lightly. Haliruo immediately felt a bone-piercing pain, causing his face to contort in pain. At this moment, the skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. It seems like you still don't understand the situation. Since that's the case, I'll leave a mark on your body. No, I'll tell you everything. Knowing that his life was in the hands of others, Haliruo didn't dare to play any tricks. He hurriedly begged for mercy and told the skinny monkey-like man the location of the crude oil. It's in the warehouse in the west of the city. That used to be the city's granary. Take me to see it. Remember, kid, don't play any tricks. Otherwise, I promise I'll take your life before you can shout. The skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. The warehouse in the west of the city was where the crude oil was located. But without seeing it with their own eyes, they couldn't be at ease. Trembling, Haliruo put on his clothes and opened the door. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he saw the 4 guards guarding the door. When they saw the young master walk out, they quickly lowered their heads and saluted. However, when they saw the skinny monkey-like figure, the 4 guards couldn't help but reveal a trace of confusion in their eyes. They had been watching outside the door and didn't see any man enter this room. Where did this person come from? How could they know that one of Skinny Monkey's specialties was the bone shrinkage skill? Although the gap in the window outside the door was not very big, it was enough for him to use his unique skill to enter. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, young master will dig out your eyes. When the skinny monkey-like figure noticed that the 4 guards were looking at him, he glared back fiercely. At the same time, he gently applied some force to the dagger behind Haliruo's waist. Cough, don't look around. She's one of us. Although he could speak freely now, he knew that if he said something he shouldn't say, the first one to fall would be himself. As soon as he said that he was one of them, the 4 guards immediately showed a look of understanding. They lowered their heads slowly with an expression that said, "We understand." Clearly, they had misunderstood and thought that their young master's taste had changed. He no longer liked women, but men. Angered by the 4 guards' gazes, Haliruo really wanted to shout, "Your young master doesn't have any other hobbies. Even if he did, he wouldn't like such a skinny man." Of course, he could only think these words in his heart. Shou Ho accompanied the young master and the 4 guards as they walked towards the entrance of the drunken pleasure house. Along the way, many girls greeted him warmly, but because he had something on his mind, he did not reply to any of them. Haliruo only had one question in his mind. When he left the door, there would be 6 more guards. At that time, would they be able to turn around and attack him? Haliruo couldn't guess if these people would kill him after achieving their goal. So if there was a chance, he would definitely give it a try. And this thought disappeared as soon as he walked out of the door and met up with the 6 guards at a street corner. Not for other reasons, but because of the sudden appearance of 3 strangers. The short blades in their hands danced, and in a few moments, the seemingly tall and strong guards were all killed on the ground. And the other side only had 4 people, including Skinny Monkey. The 10 guards didn't even have time to figure out what had happened, and all of them died from fatal injuries. All of this fell into Haliruo's eyes. He immediately said in horror, You just want to look at the oil, not kill people, right? Of course not. The skinny monkey-like man chuckled. If you're obedient, I won't kill you. I can assure you that I won't kill you. All right, now that there are no more annoying flies, we can go. The 10 corpses were thrown into an inconspicuous corner in the darkness. Haliruo, with 4 guards following behind him, headed straight for the warehouse in the west of the city. Along the way, the soldiers sent by Fan Yuhai and his father, Agar Dorji, were all taken care of one by one. Perhaps they thought that they were hiding very well, but in front of the well-trained and inhumane Wolf Fong members, Their every move was magnified like a magnifying glass. As they made their way to the warehouse in the west of the city, Haliruo was still waiting for something to happen. He knew that his father had secretly arranged for people to follow him. As soon as they appeared, he would seize the opportunity to escape. But unfortunately, the journey was incomparably peaceful. He even saw 2 groups of Mongolian cavalry patrolling the streets. Haliruo, who cherished his life, didn't have the courage to shout out. Since Skinny Monkey had sworn an oath to longevity heaven, he had no choice but to believe him. It had to be said that Wolf Fong had chosen the right person. A person who was extremely afraid of death would definitely not play around with his life. Just like that, the 5 of them successfully arrived at the warehouse. From afar, they could see a group of about 100 Mongolian soldiers guarding the place. When they saw someone approaching from afar, one of them shouted loudly, "Who are you? Leave immediately." Haliruo was clearly startled by this shout and his footsteps came to a halt. At this moment, a dagger was poked at his waist. Skinny Monkey's devilish voice sounded out again. "What are you afraid of? Have you forgotten your identity?" Haliruo, who was originally covered in a layer of cold sweat, finally remembered who he was. From the moment he was threatened until now, he found that his courage was becoming smaller and smaller. After being reminded by Skinny Monkey, his heroic spirit rose and he took large strides forward. At the same time, he shouted, "Who are you? You don't even recognize your family's young master?" As he walked closer and closer to the warehouse, the guards saw that it was Haliruo and his 4 guards. He couldn't help but straighten his body. "So it's young master. But I don't know what you're doing here so late at night." "I'm following my father's orders to get some oil." Haliruo followed Skinny Monkey's instructions and walked towards the warehouse with his hands behind his back. Seeing that they were about to enter the warehouse, a Mongolian soldier followed the rules and blocked Haliruo's path. "You dare to block me?" Haliruo pretended to be very angry and roared. "Have you forgotten that your master, Fan Yuhai, was once my father's subordinate?" Of course, these words were a bit too big. They were just temporarily treating Agadorji as their leader. Of course, no one would mention this matter at this time. Seeing that Haliruo was angry, the guard hurried over. young master, don't lower yourself to the same level as the servant. He doesn't know your identity, huh? He doesn't know, but you do. Isn't it enough that I'm standing here alone? Can I go in and take a look?" Haliruo put on a demonic expression as he looked at the guard general. He looked like he would fly into a rage at any moment and even start beating people up. Haliruo's reputation in the army was naturally not good. He didn't have much ability, but he was arrogant and had a bad temper. However, he had a good father. If he really provoked him and beat him up here, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to say anything even if he was in the right. The guard naturally understood this logic. He wouldn't go against his young master because of a password. He immediately smiled apologetically. "Young master, of course I know you. It's just that if you want oil, you can't go in?" Haliruo thought that the guard was being tactful. However, after hearing his reply, it was clear that this wasn't the case. Haliruo's face fell. Young master, don't be angry. I'm not stopping you. I'm just telling you that there's no more oil inside. It's all been moved away." The guard came forward and said softly, "Moved away? Why didn't I know about this?" Haliruo's face was filled with shock. This wasn't an act. He really didn't know. Oh, this was an order from General Fan. Not long after the sky turned dark, the oil was moved away. The guard naturally couldn't say that this was a secret order from Fan Yuhai. If he said that, it would seem that Fan Yuhai didn't trust Agadorji and his son. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Chapter 8:35. Even without the general's explanation, Haliruo understood what he meant. When he thought about how he had to hide such an important matter from his father and himself, he couldn't help but feel angry. Good, this Fan Yuhai is getting more and more arrogant. Let's see if I don't find trouble with him tomorrow. Fine, I'll tell you where the kerosene was moved, and this matter will have nothing to do with you." He pretended to be very angry as he spoke, his saliva dripping from his mouth. His gaze landed on the defending general. But when he looked over, he saw the general's hesitant expression. He said angrily, "What, are you trying to hide it from me? Or was the kerosene not moved at all? You were lying to me all along." I wouldn't dare. Originally, the general really didn't want to say anything. After all, the kerosene was moved in secret, and he didn't want more people to know. But since Haraluo had said so, if he didn't tell him the truth, he would really offend him. Helpless, he took a step forward and carefully set a place. "So it's there." Haraluo nodded in surprise, then looked at the general and said, "Fine, I'll believe you for now. If you're lying, don't blame me for taking care of you." I wouldn't dare. But young master, I'll have to trouble you not to tell anyone that I told you this. Otherwise, I'm afraid General Fan will beat me up." As he spoke, the general cupped his hands and begged for mercy. "Don't worry, I won't say that you told me. I'll just say that I found it myself. I'm leaving." Haraluo turned and left with Shouho and the other 4 guards. The general couldn't help but wipe the sweat from his forehead. This little ancestor was finally gone. Haraluo's group of 5 quickly left the warehouse. When there was no one around, Shouho immediately asked, "Speak, where was the kerosene moved to?" At this moment, Haraluo no longer looked as imposing as before. Instead, he looked like he was begging for mercy. "I can tell you, but can you promise to spare my life?" "Of course, as long as we see the kerosene, I won't kill you. I've already sworn." Skinny Monkey chuckled. Hararuo let out a sigh of relief at the thought of an oath. "The kerosene has been moved to a ruined temple in the south of the city. I'll take you there now." Fan Yuhai had once used fire to burn down the mercenary army and obtained a great victory. However, he also knew that this thing was a double-edged sword. It could hurt others, but it could also hurt him. Therefore, the location of the kerosene was constantly changing. Apart from the soldiers guarding the kerosene, no one else knew where it had gone. Originally, this was to prevent the mercenaries from setting the place on fire, but unexpectedly, the mercenaries still found the place. Tai, who was indeed very careful. Although he thought that the warehouse might be where the kerosene was stored, he didn't dare to fully believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Who would have thought that he was right to be careful? Not long after, Haraluo brought Skinny Monkey and the others to the ruined temple. There was indeed a group of Mongol soldiers guarding the place, but they were all hidden in the shadows. If Haraluo didn't appear here, they wouldn't have come out so easily. However, no matter where it was proven that Haraluo's name was strong enough. Perhaps this also proved that the Mongol army's management was flawed. In any case, no one dared to offend him. They allowed him to enter the temple and take some oil before leaving in satisfaction. Inside the temple, Skinny Monkey saw over 100 barrels of oil placed here. After a certain distance, he revealed his original appearance. "All right, I'll leave this place to you guys. I'm going to report the situation to Tiger Head. See you later." After saying that, Skinny Monkey quickly left. Haraluo wanted to stop him, but another tall guard, nicknamed King Kong, stepped forward and blocked his way. "Kid, are you ready?" King Kong sneered as he played with a sharp dagger in his hand. Sensing danger, Haraluo's face turned pale. "What are you doing? He said he wouldn't kill me just now." "That's right, he won't kill you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left so quickly." "But I didn't say I wouldn't kill you, did I?" King Kong was still smiling, but the killing intent on his face was getting heavier and heavier. At this moment, his killing intent was revealed. He couldn't wait any longer. This person in front of him had caused trouble for the 6th young master more than once. In Wolf Fang's eyes, such a person deserved to die. "You're despicable." Seeing that they were about to hit him while he was down, Haraluo wanted to shout. Even if he died, he wanted to make some noise and attract attention. Unfortunately, his reaction was still a little too slow. The moment he opened his mouth, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, all the strength in his body seemed to have been sucked out at this moment. With a face full of depression and regret, he ended his life just like that. Haraluo was dead. After his death, Skinny Monkey quickly returned to the drunken pleasure house. He found Tai Hu and reported the new situation. He thought that it was a close call. Fortunately, he went to take a look. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would have made a big mistake. I already know what happened. Inform the brothers to stay away from the ruined temple and hide. Also, inform Captain Bai Zhua and the others that we will begin the operation in half an hour. The cold wind whistled. Although it was spring, the early spring in the grasslands was still very cold at night. Yang Chendong, who had just taken a nap, was woken up by the radio operator, Wang Shan. After reading the contents of the telegram, he laughed coldly and said, "Good, Tai Hu and the others have done a great service. How about this? Immediately call Tiger's Mane and all the other commanders over for a meeting." In the middle of the night, the mercenary camp started to get busy. One by one, the commanders walked into their tents with faces full of suspicion. When they came out again, their faces were filled with excitement. Not long after, the entire camp started to move. However, this time, no one blew the whistle. The soldiers in their tents were all quietly woken up. The movements of the mercenary camp did not attract the attention of the enemy. This was also due to the tyrannical style of the reconnaissance unit. In order to ensure that they would not be attacked, they would usually place their sentries far away. Slowly, the Mongolian army had gotten used to it. Since they had no intention of attacking the camp, they retreated further and further, losing the ability to observe the movements of the mercenary camp at night. The half hour was about to pass. The various regiments and various ranks of soldiers walked out. They mounted their horses and held their blades. They were densely packed and waited in the cold wind. The commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunxing, appeared again. Following Yang Chendong's shout, 2 100mm regimental mortar-caliber mortars were delivered in front of everyone. In order to deliver the 2 cannons, Su Yunxing had personally escorted them. They had arrived 3 days later than the army, but it had to be said that the timing was perfect. "Get ready." Looking at the 2 black cannons, which gave off a chilling feeling, Yang Chendong lightly nodded his head towards Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao. These 2 captains had often followed him to test the cannons. Before he had an official artillery unit, they could be considered as qualified candidates. According to the target coordinates that they had obtained before, the 2 cannons were adjusted to the best position after being verified. Then 2 shells were loaded into the barrels of the cannons. After that, the 2 captains turned their attention back to Yang Chendong. He took a deep breath. For tonight's counterattack, he had waited for 3 days. Of those 3 days, he had allowed the other party to insult and abuse him. Now, everything was about to end. From the time when Tiger's Mane and the others were burned to ashes to this time, only 11 days had passed. He was about to get his revenge. Fire! Under the gazes of all the soldiers, Yang Chendong's shout rang out. Following that, 2 intense and dazzling flames soared into the sky. They flew straight towards the ruined temple in Wanda City, which was tens of li away. The cannonballs flew across the night sky like shooting stars. This scene was seen by some of the Mongolian cavalry who were guarding the city. However, before they could react, 2 loud explosions rang out in their ears. Then, flames soared into the sky. Following that, explosions rang out one after another. The cannons bombarded the oil, causing a chain reaction. Flames soared into the sky and explosions rang out incessantly. Looking at this scene, Yang Chendong raised his hand and shouted, "Blow the bugle call. Everyone charge. Charge." The more than 10,000 mercenary cavalrymen couldn't wait any longer. With loud shouts, they galloped forward on their horses and charged straight ahead. The 2 remaining mortars adjusted their angles and aimed at the south gate of Wanda City and continued to fire. They wanted to clear a path for the mercenary soldiers. In the city, the loud explosions sounded like an earthquake. Khan Sud immediately put on his coat and rushed out of his room. He stared at the ruined temple in disbelief. His eyes widened as he thought to himself, "It's over, it's over." However, something even more frightening happened. Just as he was standing in front of the door and lamenting, a small flame suddenly flashed and entered his chest. The powerful recoil directly knocked Kansa to the ground. This sudden, unforeseen event attracted the loud shouts of several of the soldiers around him. The decapitation operation had begun. At this moment, it wasn't just this place. Gunshots rang out from several enemy generals' residences. The phantom members who had been lying in ambush for a long time fully displayed their strengths, firing bullet after bullet into the chests of the targets they had long imprinted in their hearts. Chapter 8:36. One of the targets was Agar Dorji. However, for some reason, the bullet that should have hit his chest only hit his shoulder instead. Fresh blood gushed out from the wound, causing Agar Dorji to scream in pain. My lord, my lord! The soldiers ran over and surrounded Agar Dorji to prevent anyone from hurting him. At the same time, they looked around vigilantly, searching for the assassin. But how could they know the power of a sniper rifle? A sniper more than 1,000 meters away was already beyond their knowledge. How could they still find him? Not to mention, the city was already in chaos. This was the best cover for them. Stop shouting. I'm not dead. Quick, inform the other generals. Retreat, retreat. Agadorji felt the pain coming from his right arm as he gave orders to his bodyguard beside him. My lord, are we not going to defend the city? One of the soldiers asked an idiotic question. Defend my ass. Don't you see? The fire has already started, the people's minds are in chaos, the city cannot be defended. All right, go inform the other generals, we are retreating in the direction of Guangwu town, quickly. After Agadorji shouted these words, he finally fainted from the pain. Following that, everyone was busy shouting. However, even at this time, there were still some bodyguards who didn't forget to go to the Drunken Joy Pavilion. They wanted to find the young master and let him take charge of the situation. However, the reality only proved that this was just a beautiful idea. Fan Yuhai was also attacked by the beheading operation. Regrettably, this person's residence was a little too remote. Perhaps because he was naturally vigilant, his surroundings were filled with his personal guards who had followed him since the Jiaoji period, making it impossible for Baizhua to approach. In the end, he could only choose to set up an ambush at a distance of 1,600 meters. But to be honest, at such a distance, the effectiveness of a sniper rifle was very low. Captain Baizhua was the one who personally carried out this mission. He knew that this person was the only one in the city who gave the sixth young master the most headaches. If he could kill this person, it would be his greatest achievement. Baizhua held his breath and focused his mind. Even though the cold wind was howling in his ears, his posture did not change at all. He continued to stare at his target, waiting for the best opportunity to attack. Through the infrared scope, he saw Fan Yuhai get on his horse and lead a group of cavalrymen out of the courtyard. They headed straight for the main street, and the distance between them shortened. 1,000 meters, 800 meters, the best distance was only 500 meters. However, the best angle and opportunity to shoot did not appear. Fan Yuhai, who was surrounded by bodyguards, gave off a feeling that they did not know where to start. It seemed that no matter which shot was fired, it would be difficult to hit the target. Even if the shot was fired, it would be difficult to guarantee that the shot would hit the target while moving. Forget it. Bai's heart sank again. He adjusted his target again. This time, he decided not to hit the man, but the horse. Relatively speaking, a horse's body was much larger than a human's, especially the pure black horse that Fan Yuhai was riding. Even on the battlefield, it was like a crane among chickens. When the target changed, it was quickly locked, followed by the sound of a gunshot. Bang! The sound of the gunshot was accompanied by the scene of the warhorse falling down and Fan Yuhai flying up. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Bai's was shot again, but unfortunately, because he was too anxious, this shot did not hit the target, but hit a bodyguard. Blood splashed, and the bodyguard fell to the ground and died. In exchange, other people shouted to protect the general. Baizhua quietly took advantage of this chaos. The sniper's rule was that once the shot missed, they must withdraw immediately. Otherwise, it would not be him sniping others, but others would snipe him. General Lu Duo, who was in the team, immediately came to Fan Yuhai, who fell to the ground. He saw that the general's face was covered with mud and snow, and even one of his front teeth was knocked out. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He exclaimed, "General, are you okay?" "I'm fine." He felt pain all over his body, but fortunately, every part of his body was still intact, so he was relieved. However, when he thought about the battle before him, he still said to Lu Duo, "Quick, immediately cover the retreat. Find Khan Sud and follow him out of Yunda City. We can't stay here any longer." At this moment, Fan Yuhai's heart was filled with too much unwillingness. Over the past 2 days, his reputation in the army had increased day by day, and the morale of the army had also increased step by step. He was the first person to face the god of war and not admit defeat. He even shouted at the other party to retreat. Because of this, he had become a hero in the eyes of some people. If he had a few more days, he would have even made up his mind to go all out and fight to the end. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong wasn't a person who didn't fight back. He finally started to fight back, and it was so fierce. The explosion of crude oil caused a big fire and panic in the city. The south gate was blown open, and the defense of the city was no longer foolproof. Now that he was injured, although his life wasn't in danger, he had lost the ability to move freely for a short period of time. Under such a disadvantage, he was afraid that he could only abandon the city. However, he knew that his battle with Yang Chendong wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the grassland. Of course, because of the lack of information, he didn't know that Khan Sud, Agadorji, and some other generals had been shot. If he knew, he would have given the order to retreat even more decisively. Lu Duo had always been by Fan Yuhai's side. Since the time in Jiaoji, he could see that his general was extraordinary. Facts had proven that no matter how many times others had been defeated by the mercenaries, even if their countries had been destroyed and they had lost their lives, General Fan had always protected himself well. Just this point alone was enough to earn Lu Duo's respect. Now that the general had given the order, he would definitely do his best to carry it out. After agreeing, he ordered someone to pass on the order. Then, he found a large wooden plank and placed Fan Yuhai on it, before leaving with his head held high. At the east gate of Wanda City, there were a few gaping holes in the walls. Following these holes, the mercenaries easily entered. What followed was a battle cry that shook the heavens. The 2,000 Mongol soldiers that were in charge of defending this area became the first target. Over 10,000 Mongol soldiers came from different directions like a tornado. Even a man and a blade wasn't something that these 2,000 Mongol soldiers could withstand. Very quickly, this army was swallowed up by the flood of horses. After successfully entering the city, they could see many Mongol soldiers on horseback searching for their troops. When these people saw the mercenaries charging into the city, they immediately scattered and wanted to leave. However, in front of the mercenaries who had a plan in mind, their actions were laughable. When the first regiment had their own mission, they only needed to follow the orders. As for the Mongol soldiers blocking their way, they could just casually kill them. Regiment after regiment of mercenaries entered the city, and the independent division led by Tiger Mang set their sights on Sud Khan, who was constantly running away. When the scouts reported that a large group of Mongol soldiers was retreating towards the north of the city, he immediately made a decision and led a division of cavalry to chase after them. The previous defeat had always been a pain in Tiger Man's heart. Originally, he wanted to perform better, but he never expected that he would be defeated in the end. Although the sixth young master did not punish him for this matter, and did not even say a harsh word, he knew in his heart that the young master must be disappointed in him. When one made a mistake, it wasn't something that could be fixed with just a sentence. What Hu Mang wanted to do was to establish a new merit and prove his worth once again. This time, after hearing the direction that the Mongolian cavalry fled in, he sent a personal guard to inform the sixth young master. Then he led his men and chased after them. Tiger's man wanted to wipe away his shame, and this time, he was really going all out. He ordered his soldiers to place their excess equipment outside and left a battalion of soldiers to guard it. Following that, he took back the horses of this battalion. He wanted to increase the speed of his troops to the maximum and wanted to catch up to the escaping enemy. Tiger's man left the city. Even though the independent division wasn't fully replenished after the previous battle, Tiger's man didn't hesitate at all with 5,000 soldiers. He knew that the time to beat the drowning dog had arrived. At this moment, there was no time to hesitate. Tiger's man left the city and chased after the enemy at an extremely fast speed. In order to ensure that he could catch up to the enemy, he used all the flares he had. Every time he ran a certain distance, he would fire a shot to light up the path of the army. The Mongol army that left the city first was originally a little flustered. However, after leaving the city, their panic slowly faded. Although the mercenaries had caught them off guard, and even Sud Khan, Fan Yuhai, and a few other generals were injured or killed, they still had their own advantage. That was that their numbers were still many times that of the enemy. Based on this, as long as the mercenaries weren't stupid or crazy, they definitely wouldn't chase after them. When more and more people had such thoughts in their hearts, suddenly, the scouts behind them sent news that they had discovered a large group of mercenaries following them. Many of the generals were stunned. Did these mercenaries not want to live anymore? Weren't they afraid that they would die if they chased after them? General Chen, I'll give you 3,000 cavalrymen. Stay behind and bring up the rear. Remember, it's best if you can take down the enemy. If you can't, delay for a while before leaving. Lu Duo, who had temporarily taken over Fan Yuhai's position, said to one of his subordinates. General Chen was asked to stay behind. Although he had a bitter expression, he knew that he couldn't disobey orders. He could only nod his head and leave with 3,000 cavalrymen. The Mongol army continued to retreat. Lu Duo looked at the dark sky and hoped that the sun would rise. As long as the sun rose, he would be able to clearly see the actions of the mercenaries. He wouldn't give them any chance to launch a sneak attack. If they did well, it wasn't impossible for them to counterattack. Chapter 837. General Chen led the 3,000 cavalrymen back and coincidentally bumped into Tiger's mane. Just as he got into position and raised his saber to kill, a white light suddenly flashed in front of his eyes. The strong light made him unable to open his eyes for a moment. Fortunately, this feeling disappeared quickly. However, before the light disappeared, his eyes couldn't help but twitch because he seemed to see the cavalrymen on the other side raising their spears, and then, there was no then. The 6 battalions of musketeers used the flare to lock onto the approximate location of the enemy. Then, gunshots rang out and the Mongolian cavalrymen who were still in a daze were shot off their horses one after another. When the distance was less than 500 meters, the power of the Type 81 assault rifles had already exceeded the imagination of some people. After the gunshots, there was the sound of war horses galloping on the ground. Tiger's mane led the other cavalrymen and quickly rushed over. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was stunned, they raised their sabers and slashed down. As they slashed, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell off their horses one after another. Without knowing the enemy's situation and the fact that they were defeated, the 3,000 Mongolian cavalrymen couldn't even unleash their advantage and were pierced through by the arrow formation. Naturally, the reason why they were able to succeed so smoothly was because they weren't elites to begin with. They were all recruited by Fan Yuhai when he was roaming the grasslands. Their combat strength could only be said to be average. Their numbers were inferior, their quality was inferior, and even their will to fight was much weaker. After just one wave of attack, they took at least 1,000 heads. After just one attack, the 3,000 cavalry were crippled. General Chen was unfortunately killed by a musket. Without a head, the Mongolian cavalrymen scattered like birds and beasts. Those who could run ran away without a trace. Those who couldn't immediately threw down their weapons and surrendered. Leave a battalion to look after the captives. Also, take away their war horses. Everyone get 2 horses and continue the chase. After tasting the sweetness of victory, Tiger's mane didn't have any intention of stopping. To him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Unless the sun was about to rise, unless his independent division was crippled, he wouldn't stop the chase. The Mongolian cavalry was still retreating at a moderate pace. Although they were retreating in a hurry, they still brought a large amount of rations with them when they left. This was also the reason why they could not run fast. Half an hour after General Chen's 3,000 men were sent out, another scout reported that there were still mercenaries chasing after them, and they were less than 8 miles away. For cavalry, a distance of 8 miles could be covered in 2 or 3 charges. Hearing this, Lu Duo wanted to stop the army and have a head-on clash with the mercenaries, but he was worried that he would fall into their trap. He wanted to ask General Fan, who was already unconscious, but he was afraid that this would show his incompetence. In the end, he made his own decision. He called over General Kambala, who was guarding the rear with him, and told him his worries. "General, there are mercenaries following us. If we don't get rid of them, trouble may come at any time." Standing in front of Zambala, Lu Duo spoke while using the torch beside him to observe the changes on his face. Both Lu Duo and Zambala were generals in the alliance. If it had to be said, the former was far less famous than the latter. If not for the fact that Fan Yuhai's warhorse had been killed and he had fallen down in a hurry and passed the command of the army to Lu Duo before he fainted, he would not have been able to ask this question. After hesitating for a moment, Zambala finally nodded his head. "All right, then I will lead the troops to cover the rear. But I want to take 10,000 cavalry with me." When it was Lu Duo's turn, he did not hesitate at all, as if he already knew that there would be such an outcome. Seeing Lu Duo agree so quickly, Zambala did not have anything to worry about. The mercenaries only had 10,000 men. With these 10,000 men, he naturally did not have anything to worry about. In the blink of an eye, Zambala had gathered the 10,000 cavalry that originally belonged to him. These were all the elite forces of the Mongol desert. With these, there was nothing to be afraid of. Zambala led the army and left. After Lu Duo sent them off, he turned to the army and said, "Let's go too." Then he rode his horse towards Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai, who was under the protection of a group of personal guards, was still lying in a carriage with his eyes closed. Even when the army left the city, there were still people who saw him. Everyone knew that General Fan had been attacked and fell off his horse. Naturally, they thought that he had been shot like Suda Khan. But when Lu Duo rode his horse over, the carriage's curtain was opened from the inside. Lu Duo's figure also entered the carriage. "General, are you all right?" After entering the carriage, Lu Duo asked with concern. "I'm fine. It's just a tooth. There's no problem." Fan Yuhai smiled confidently and then asked, "How are things?" "General, everything has been done according to your orders. You really have great foresight. The mercenaries really did chase over. I first sent General Chen, who was close to the Mongol army, out. As expected, he was not a match. Then, Zambala brought 10,000 troops to cover the retreat." Lu Duo looked at Fan Yuhai with admiration as if he was looking at a god. The god of war was indeed admirable. He could always turn something rotten into something magical. But Lu Duo still thought that their general was not bad. He also had great foresight. If it wasn't for the fact that the general's starting point was too low and he couldn't make many decisions, if they really had the same number of troops, it would be hard to tell who would win. Just like now, the general was just taking advantage of the situation and beating them at their own game. This solved the biggest problem in front of them. One was General Chen, who had betrayed them. The other was General Zamubala, who was by Suda's side. As long as these two died, not only would their internal problems be solved, they would also have one less enemy. This would be a great help for them to take over the Mongol forces in the Gobi Desert. "And I'm not worried about you. All right, go and inform Zhang Meng. Tell him to protect Suda Khan. At this time, nothing can happen to him. Also, I heard that gunshot wounds are hard to treat. Is that true?" Fan Yuhai nodded calmly. He had used the opportunity of being ambushed to do this. It could be said that he had turned a bad thing into a good thing. In reality, he had never thought that he could rely on this alliance to defeat Yang Chendong. Or rather, in front of a strong force, he had never thought of doing anything to the mercenaries. Therefore, he had not tried his best in this battle. Everything was waiting. He believed that the god of war was not a normal person. He must have his own plans for appearing so suddenly. As expected, the facts had proven everything. The city was on fire and the army was in chaos. The east city gate was broken and the enemy had invaded the city. The series of attacks made Fan Yuhai speechless. At the same time, he used the opportunity to achieve his own military goals. This was the nature of a fierce and ruthless person. As long as it was beneficial to him, he would do it. As for emotions and allies, he could throw them all to the back of his mind. Only benefits were what he pursued and needed. Understood. Hearing Fan Yuhai say that gunshot wounds were hard to treat, Lu Duo understood that it would be very difficult for Khan Side to recover. In the city, Yang Chendong followed the army into the city and saw the two captains, Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo, waiting there. You did a good job. I will record your achievements later. Yang Chendong knew that the ancient beheading operation was different from the modern one. The generals in the modern army usually did not have many guards around them. Even if they did, they would not follow them at every step. Unlike the generals in the modern army, they all had bodyguards protecting them. Some even had servants. When they went out, they would not leave their side at all. It was very difficult to take their head in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers. It was already very good to be able to complete the mission. Excitement flashed across the faces of the two captains, but then Bai Zhuo lowered his head and said with some shame, "Sixth young master, I personally went to carry out the operation against Fan Yuhai, but there were too many bodyguards around him. I did not wait for the right opportunity and only hit his horse, causing it to fall to the ground." Fan Yuhai was fine, which was something that Yang Chendong regretted. However, when he thought about how this person had been defeated by him more than once, and how the facts had proven that this person was not terrifying, he said magnanimously, "It's fine, this is his fate. Perhaps this is not a bad thing for us. But next time, we won't be so lucky. And, next time, we definitely won't let him escape." After hearing the encouragement, Bai Zhuo said with a very firm attitude. This time, he had also hardened his heart and strived to achieve great merit when he had the chance. At this moment, one of Tiger's Mane's bodyguards came 5 meters in front of Yang Chendong, dismounted and saluted. "Sixth young master, our division commander led the army to pursue the enemy." "Oh!" Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. He could understand Tiger's Mane's feelings. After the previous defeat, he wanted to prove himself through a big battle. Now that the enemy had fled in panic, it was indeed a good opportunity to pursue. However, when he thought of Fan Yuhai's various methods, he was still a little worried. He looked at the captain of the 1st Guard Squad, Chiu Vi, and asked, "Have all the regiments reported their positions? Who is the closest to the independent division?" Reporting to the 6th young master, the 1st Regiment of Tatar Cavalry is killing the enemy outside the city. There is also the Ferocious Tiger Regiment and the 1st and 2nd Regiments of Cavalry in the city. "Good, immediately inform Commander Su He, tell him to put down the matter at hand and use the fastest speed to chase after the independent division and provide support. Also, inform the Ferocious Tiger Regiment and the 1st Regiment of Cavalry to follow us to the north." He knew that a thin camel was bigger than a horse. Once the Mongol tribes in the north stabilized their morale, the independent division would not be able to defeat them. Chapter 8:38. After the order was given, other than the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, the other regiments and battalions followed Yang Chendong to the north of the city. At this moment, 100 miles away from the north of the city, Tiger's Man's independent regiment had clashed with Kambala's 10,000 cavalry, and a huge battle had begun. When two armies met on a narrow path, the courageous would win. After the two armies unexpectedly met on the battlefield, without the slightest bit of nonsense, the two sides fought together. Gunshots, shouts, and roars mixed together. No matter if it was Tiger's Man or Kambala, they were both very prideful people. Since they started fighting, they would not back down easily. Just like how a mountain could not contain two tigers, only one person could stand on the battlefield. First, a series of gunshots rang out, killing hundreds of enemies in the dark night, and the distance between the two sides was pulled closer. Withdrawing 6 battalions of musketeers, Tiger Brilliance led the other 8 battalions of cavalry to personally lead the charge, becoming the tip of an arrow as they charged towards the enemy formation. In the dark night, in order to see the situation around them clearly, both sides had no choice but to light up their torches. From afar, the battlefield looked like a walking fire dragon, majestic and shocking. In terms of military strength, Tiger's Edge was still at a disadvantage. He only had a little more than 3,000 men, but he had to fight with 10,000 cavalrymen. However, that didn't mean that he would lose. With his strong fighting spirit and the constant harassment from the 2,000 musketeers, he wouldn't show any signs of defeat in a short time. Both sides fought together, and from time to time, there would be warriors falling off their horses and dying. It was not the arrow that pierced into the Mongol cavalry and dealt them heavy damage, but it was the arrow that was completely surrounded by the enemy's forces, and in the end, when there was only one person left, all of them would die. The cruelty and mercilessness of the battlefield was vividly displayed at this moment. In less than an hour, both sides had paid a heavy price. Slowly, the advantage of the Mongol cavalry's numbers was revealed. This time, Kambala had brought elite cavalry. In terms of fighting ability and individual strength, they were only slightly weaker than the independent regiment. This could be made up for by the advantage in numbers. Luckily, when the independent regiment was struggling, the 1st Tatar Cavalry Regiment arrived. Regiment Commander Su, he shouted, and fresh troops entered the battlefield. The addition of this new force caused the tilted battle platform to become more balanced. Seeing more and more mercenaries, Kambala's mood also changed. His mission was not to destroy the mercenaries behind him, but to block them and buy time for the main force to retreat. Now, it seemed that more than 2 hours had passed, and the sun was about to rise. His mission was complete. Even if he retreated now, no one could blame him. At this moment, he was thinking about retreating. Humang seemed to have seen through Zamubala's thoughts. How could he be willing to give up? It was not easy for him to seize this opportunity. He would definitely not let the other party escape. After giving the order, the entanglement became even more intense. It was as if they were both in the same boat. As the battle continued, the disadvantage of the Mongol cavalry became more and more obvious. They were elites, but this battle was not to attack but to stop the enemy. It was the same as them using their lives in exchange for others to escape. It was impossible for them to not be angry. This kind of battle was not what everyone liked. If they won, they would only complete a military mission. If they lost, they might lose their lives. It was really not a good job. In the beginning, they had the advantage, so it wasn't a big deal. But now, their advantage was getting smaller and smaller, and the sun was about to rise. Once the main force of the mercenaries caught up with them, wouldn't they all be wiped out here? Everyone was selfish. The cavalry who did not want to die started to find a chance to retreat. Facing the attacks of the mercenaries, they did not resist as fiercely as before. The morale of the troops was obviously shaken at this moment. As the main general, Kambala was naturally deeply affected. He could understand the mentality and situation of the soldiers, so he did not blame anyone. He steeled his heart and decided to abandon the 1,000 cavalry to stop the mercenaries while he led the main force to escape. He even had the thought of cutting off his own losses. But before he could think about it, a large number of torches appeared in the west and were quickly moving towards the battlefield. Just based on the direction, it should be the main force of the mercenaries. At this moment, he did not give Kambala any more time to think. He turned around and fled. As he retreated, he shouted for the other cavalry to retreat with him. The mercenaries' reinforcements had just appeared. If they escaped now, they still had a chance. But the moment they were surrounded, they would not be able to find a way out. Zamubala decisively chose to retreat. He didn't even have the time to arrange who would cover his retreat. He wanted to seize every minute to escape. However, he also didn't think about who his opponent was this time. Even if Yang Chendong arrived with his troops, how could he let the fat meat in his hands escape? Long before he appeared, he had already arranged for the leader of the ferocious tiger regiment, Xiaofeng, to circle behind them and set up a formation. The predecessor of the ferocious tiger regiment was the Cold Vanguard regiment. The old soldiers were not only equipped with the 95 style, They were also equipped with 7 steel crossbows. No matter if it was close combat or long range, they could be called the king. With such an elite army placed there, how could you escape just because you wanted to? Kambala did not know this. But very quickly he realized that the situation was not right. The retreating army continued to fall on the path of the charge. The continuous firing of the muskets was like firecrackers being lit. It continued to ring out. Every time a bullet was fired, there would be a cavalry soldier falling off his horse. Stop the charge. Seeing the continuous casualties, Kambala finally knew that his path of retreat was cut off. Since that was the case, he turned his horse around and decided to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Compared to the unknown path ahead, it was better to turn back and fight the mercenaries head-on. If he was lucky, he might be able to kill his way out. Even if he was unlucky, he might be able to kill 2 more enemies. Kambala turned his head and launched a counterattack. His horse galloped forward. He had the idea of charging forward recklessly and fighting his way out. However, his luck was too bad. He met the 2 generals Tiger's Man and Su He head-on. 2 against 1, heart against heart. After clashing with 3 blades, Kambala's chest had a wound of about 40 centimeters. Fresh blood quickly flowed out from the wound. The strength in his body was also rapidly draining away. Just like that, a fierce general stepped into a dead end. General Kambala, surrender. Seeing the fatally wounded Kambala, Tiger's Man lowered his cavalry blade and said with a trace of admiration. Although they were enemies, the other party fought bravely. Just this point alone was worthy of his respect. A true Mongol cavalry does not surrender. Go and die. Summoning the last bit of strength in his body, after a roar, Kambala continued to gallop forward. It was as if he wanted to perish together with Tiger's Man. The cavalry blade flashed. A blade to the throat. Tiger's Man firmly held onto the cavalry blade that was still dripping with blood. Beside him, Kambala's body trembled. Then, with a plop, he fell off the horse. His eyes were wide open, indicating the unwillingness in his heart when he died. However, if he knew that he was only used by Fan Yuhai and that his head was delivered to the hands of the mercenaries by his allies, he might not be able to close his eyes. Kambala died in battle and the sky began to brighten. The situation on the battlefield was so clear. Under the encirclement of cavalry and muskets, the Mongol cavalry finally put down the curved blades in their hands and knelt down to surrender. This battle was not bad. Seeing that at least 4,000 Mongol cavalry were captured, and they were the elite type, Yang Chendong revealed a gratified expression when he looked at Tiger's Man. Before, he was really worried that after the last battle, Tiger's Man's fighting spirit would be shaken and he would be afraid. Or if that was the case, he could only keep this person by his side and do some things that he could do. Fortunately, he did not disappoint him and his might did not decrease. After being praised by Yang Chendong, Tiger's Man's tiredness immediately disappeared. He opened his mouth and laughed. With these words, everything was worth it. Okay, the independent division will stay and clean up the battlefield. The other regiments will follow me back to Wanda City. There is still a big battle waiting for us. Yang Chendong stretched out his hand and patted Tiger's Man's shoulder. He turned around and shouted to the other regimental commanders who had gathered. While he was on his way to help Tiger's Man, the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment had sent news that they had surrounded Agadorji and his 10,000 men in Guangwu City, which was not far from Wanda City. This news almost didn't make Yang Chendong turn around. He knew that rice had to be eaten one bite at a time. In the end, he decided to help the independent divisions solve the problem first before going to Guangwu City to help. Considering that he only had 1 regiment and it was not a full regiment, he was afraid of losing the situation. He also ordered Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment, who was cleaning up the battlefield in Wanda City, to send a battalion to help. He also arranged for the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunsheng, to bring reinforcements. Now that the matter here was finally solved, it was time to go to Guangwu City to take a look. To tell the truth, this time's decision was somewhat beyond his expectations. Before the battle, he had only given orders to the regimental commanders to act according to the circumstances. He did not expect that his regiment could actually blast 10,000 enemies into Guangwu City. Speaking of which, this decision was not a coincidence, but a manifestation of his own superior wisdom. After receiving the military order, he took the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, which only had 2,000 men, into Wanda City. He sent people to inquire about the situation in the city. With the help of the reconnaissance battalion, he learned that Agadorji had left through the west gate. He also learned that this person had been shot in the shoulder and was afraid that he would not be able to move quickly. After that, a bold idea was born in his mind. Chapter 839. After Shoubai gave the order, a rumor spread that Sud Khan and Fan Yuhai had been ambushed and their lives were in danger. Many of the Mongol soldiers had already surrendered to the mercenaries. At the same time, he ordered his soldiers to hold 4 torches each and chase after the Tatar army under the cover of the night. As soon as the rumor spread, the scout at the rear reported it to Agar Dorji, who was fleeing in the carriage. The gunshot wound on his shoulder was no longer bleeding, but the bullet had not been removed. Every time he moved, he would feel excruciating pain. But when he heard that Sud Khan and Fan Yuhai were in trouble, he could not help but laugh to the sky. "Ha, good, very good, they are in a worse situation than me." There was a saying that when you were down on your luck, all you needed to do was to find someone who was even more unlucky than you. Then, your mental state would immediately be balanced. Agar Dorji, who was laughing, had an ugly expression on his face. He was worried about his situation, especially when he heard from his subordinates that there were mercenaries chasing after him. They didn't know how many of them there were, but they estimated that there were about 7,000 to 8,000 of them based on the number of torches. Agar Dorji's expression became even more bitter as he thought that the main force of the mercenaries was targeting him. At this time, the army was just passing by Guangwu town, which had been occupied by the Allied army. Seeing the city in front of him, he did not want to be ambushed by the mercenaries. He ordered his soldiers to enter the city and use the city as a base to defend. When the army entered the city, the 4 gates were quickly closed. Only then did Shoubai feel relieved. If the enemy did not pay attention to him, then with his 2,000 men, he would not be able to stop the army and create enough time for the main force to surround the town. Now that they had entered the city, they were like turtles in a jar, at the mercy of the mercenaries. The sky gradually brightened, and a battalion of the 2nd Regiment of Reinforced Cavalry and the main force of the Reconnaissance Battalion arrived at Guangwu town, cutting off the enemy's escape route. The Tatar cavalry, who had been running for most of the night, were now guarding the city. Although there were not many mercenaries surrounding the city, they did not intend to rush out of the city. In their view, with the protection of the city, it was much better than being surrounded on all sides of the grassland. In the morning, Yang Chendong and the main force of the mercenaries finally arrived at Guangwu town. When he saw that the city was completely surrounded, the 6th young master's face revealed a smile. Good, this time Shoubai has done a great service. 6th young master, you flatter me. It's just a little trick. Shoubai did not dare to claim the credit. It would be great if every general had this kind of little. Yang Chendong was still chuckling. He then patted Shoubai's shoulder, full of appreciation. Previously, Shoubai had suddenly been promoted from a fallen general to a regiment commander. During this time, he had not made a single contribution, only following Yang Chendong to the capital. This had caused the dissatisfaction of many people, but no one dared to challenge the authority of the 6th young master. Now, reality had given those people a slap in the face. At this time, Yang Chendong had openly said that if other officers had this kind of ability, they would also be promoted and placed in important positions. There were many brave and fierce generals in the mercenary army, but there were too few people who could hold their own. And those who had this kind of ability were now division commanders. The other regimental commanders were brave in battle, but they lacked the necessary tempering. With this order, the mercenary army surrounded Guangwu so tightly that not even a drop of water could pass through. Any other army would have been waiting for the Tatar army to break out of the encirclement or for them to surrender when they ran out of provisions. It was just a town, and without any preparations, There was no way it could support an army of 15,000 soldiers. But in Yang Chendong's eyes, he wasn't willing to wait any longer. 2 mortars were pulled to the foot of the city wall. Every 8 hours, 2 shells would be fired at the defeated Tatar army. These aimless shells seemed to fall anywhere. As they crashed into Guangwu town, the Tatar soldiers began to scream in pain. They lacked food and clothing, had no future, and could fall at any moment. How long could they last? In the impenetrable encirclement of Guangwu town, which had no water source, after just 4 days, some people began to drink from the snow on the streets and roofs. But the weather was getting warmer and there was not enough snow, so the situation became even clearer. 7 days later, after being shot, lacking medicine, and having Hilario's corpse hung outside the city, the chaotic King Agadorji died in a fit of rage. Like a dragon without a head, it opened the door and surrendered. Without wasting a single soldier, the 15,000 Tatar cavalrymen surrendered, and the mercenaries returned to the first city with the might of a great victory. This battle lasted for a total of 11 days. The shattering Meng army, injuring Sud, killing Agadorji, and the mercenary army returned to the city. In the beginning of spring, the grass began to sprout, and the willow trees were green. A new wave of construction in the city had begun. Under the plan's step-by-step work, Shi City appeared in front of the world with a small change a day and a big change a few days later. Trees that took a lot of effort to move from hundreds of miles away were planted inside and outside the city to resist the wind and sand. The people of Shi City felt like they were in a different world. The changes in the army also began. Among the 20,000 prisoners, warriors were constantly selected to supplement the various divisions. It seemed like the Duke of Loyalty was not satisfied with this change. He immediately sent a telegram to the political department of Xichen City, and the army-building operation officially began. The commander of the First Army on the Sea was decided, and as expected, it was Gao Xiong. A shining golden badge was worn on his body, and the order to promote him to Major General was given. The new army on the land, the choice of commander was out of everyone's expectations, but everything was within reason. The commander, Tiger's Mane, was not the Lung Song that everyone had imagined. The moment the order was given, Lung Song closed the door in the Lung residence in Xichen City and did not see anyone. He did not even appear in front of the military department. This situation lasted for 3 days and Yang Wu came. The door was opened and no one dared to stop him. Although Yang Wu was from the Yang family's Yang family, he had an extraordinary transcendent status in Crimson Nest City. As for him, he didn't even have a fixed official position, but he could meddle in and ask about anything. Lung Song, who closed the door to visitors, could not give face to anyone in Xichen City, but he could not avoid Yang Wu. The moment the door was opened, Lung Song, who was dressed in civilian clothes, sat in the main hall and welcomed guests. In the main hall, Yang Wu's expression was calm, especially when he saw that Lung Song was not wearing the uniform that matched his status. Instead, he was wearing civilian clothes. He shook his head gently. "Commander Leng, are you going to retire from active service?" If it was any other time, the weight of this sentence could be imagined. He would have been in fear and trepidation, but at this moment he smiled bitterly and said, "I'm afraid I can't wear it even if I want to." "Brother Yang Wu, don't you think so?" "Who said this?" "Please tell me." "Yang Wu will charge him with the crime of spreading rumors and creating trouble. Then, I'll arrest him and interrogate him." Yang Wu said unhurriedly. Then he found a chair and sat down. In the Lung residence, Yang Wu rarely came. After all, he was one of the young master's people and had to avoid suspicion. However, he did not come to the residence often. Usually, the two had a good relationship. After all, Yang Wu had a great reputation in Xichen City and had a deep relationship with Lung Feng's First Division. Is there a need for others to say this? Although Lung Song is slow-witted, he can still understand some things. Lung Song still did not raise his head as he replied. His entire body exuded a decadent aura, as if he had aged a lot. "Oh, so it turns out that some people thought they were smart, hee hee." Yang Wu chuckled, then shook his head as if he didn't dare to agree. Hearing Yang Wu's mocking words, Leng Song raised his head with a puzzled expression. He thought to himself, "Did I think wrong?" Seeing Leng Song's puzzled expression, Yang Wu shook his head. It was the young master's idea to not promote Leng Song's position this time. Leng Song's name was also not mentioned in the five-man investigation. It was still the young master's idea. In the end, this was just a warning. Leng Song's dissatisfaction with the Army's 1st Division's performance in the incident with Yang Taizhu and Chen Shuquan was also a warning. He originally thought that some people would be brave after being humiliated, but now it seemed that the pressure was too great. It was so great that some people felt like they could not breathe and wanted to give up. This was especially so when Leng Song saw that there was no hope of promotion and adopted a passive approach. When the news reached Yang Chendong's ears through a telegram, it was not hard to say whether he was disappointed or not. It was often said that the greater a person's mental endurance, the greater their achievements. Just from this sentence alone, it was clear that Leng Song's performance was not good. Yang Chendong even wanted to give up on this person. He had raised Leng Song with one hand, so of course he could suppress him with one hand. However, at this time, the future 6th Madam Luan Xiaoyu suddenly sent a telegram. She was actually pleading for Leng Song. The telegram did not have many words. The meaning was simple and clear. Everyone would make mistakes. Leng Song was just temporarily blinded by fame and fortune. In reality, his character was not bad. In Yang Tieju's case, it was already proven that he was not involved. In the investigation, there was also no evidence that he had made any mistakes. His mistake was that he had been too proactive in this period of time. His mistake was that he had contacted some people he should not have contacted, wanting to be promoted. Leng Song thought that if more people were willing to speak up for him, he would be able to firmly wear the title of Army Commander and Major General. However, he did not think about who gave him everything in Crimson City. If that person did not nod, what was the point of letting 1,000 people speak up? Chapter 840. Luan Xiaoyu's telegram changed Yang Chendong's decision in the end. Since this person had been by his side for a long time and had always performed well in the past, he finally forgave him. Thus, Yang Wu's current actions came about. Seeing that Leng Song was in such a state, it was useless to rely on words to advise him. Yang Wu sighed softly and decided to help him to the end. He would properly enlighten him and explain things to him. Of course, he would only do this once and only once. If Leng Song still did not know when to back down after this incident, then he would really have to give up. Division Commander Leng, the young master still has hope for you. After a moment of silence in the hall, Yang Wu finally spoke. Just this sentence alone made Leng Song's eyes light up. He raised his head and stared at Yang Wu. He knew that this person would definitely have something to say. Sure enough, Yang Wu did not stop and continued. Division Commander Leng's performance was indeed not very good a while ago, especially when you found a lot of people to speak for you. Your thoughts may not be wrong, but your actions were not wise. Don't you know that the people you're looking for, everything they have was given to them by young master? Their identities, including yours and mine, can be taken back at any time as long as the young master is willing? I did not mean to pressure him. I just... Leng Song anxiously explained. All right, Division Commander Leng does not need to explain to me. There is also no need for this because the young master has never cared. Otherwise, I would not be saying this to you now. However, there are some things that you can do once but absolutely cannot do a second time. Otherwise, even if Division Commander Luan pleads for you, I'm afraid it will be useless. This sentence revealed a bit of information. After digesting it, Leng Song's eyes widened. What? Division Commander Luan pleads for me? The so-called Division Commander Luan was naturally Luan Xiaoyu. However, it was precisely because of this that Leng Song's face was filled with disbelief. Be it in public or private, the relationship between the two was very ordinary. Except for the necessary contact at work, there was no personal relationship. There were even many times when Luan Xiaoyu's attitude towards Leng Song could be described as cold. Leng Song did not expect that the 6th Madam would plead for him under such a relationship. However, These words came from Yang Wu's mouth, and they were so true that no one could doubt them. When Yang Wu saw Lung Song's surprised gaze, he sighed again in his heart. The word, benefit, was indeed very powerful. Usually, Lung Song was calm and orderly when he did things, as if he had the demeanor of a great general. However, when it came to his official career, he was unable to remain calm. Yang Wu didn't want to explain anything. Commander Leng, think about it carefully. What do you have to complain about? Do you know who Hu Tu is? That's the person who's been with the young master the longest. Isn't it legitimate for him to become a commander before you? Zai, did you not hear the order of the political department? Hu Tu is the commander of the new army, and Gao Xiong is the commander of the 1st Marine Army. Lung Song was puzzled at first, but it didn't take long before his expression began to change. They were both commanders, and since there was the 1st Sea Army, then the Ground Army should also be the 1st Land Army, but why was it the 1st Army of the Ground Army? This didn't seem to make sense. The surprise on his face became more and more intense. Yang Wu had already stood up. Commander Leng, you can choose for yourself where to go. By the way, you don't have to thank the 6th Madam. As long as you work hard, that will be the greatest gratitude. Yes, this is what the 6th Madam said herself. After saying this, Yang Wu did not wait for Lung Song to speak again. He had already stood up and left, leaving behind a graceful and elegant background. Lung Song did not send him off. Instead, he sat on the chair and pondered for a long time. No one knew what the result would be except for himself. However, early the next morning, Lung Song reported to the military headquarters in his military uniform. Everything was back on track again. If there was any change, it would be that he worked harder and was more self-disciplined than before. In Crimson City, Yang Chendong reported Lung Song's recent changes through a telegram. After reading it, he sent the telegram back to Beta Persei. It's not hopeless. Young master, you must not be angry for others. Beta Persei, who knew about this matter, took the initiative to lead the conversation in another direction after comforting him. Young master, Hu Tu is getting more and more depressed. The people below are very afraid of him. Yes, Tiger's mane has indeed changed a lot. However, this is not a bad thing. When a person's position is high, he understands that it's lonely at the top. Naturally, he can't be like before. Yang Chendong nodded. Ever since Tiger's mane was promoted to the commander of the new army, he had indeed changed a lot. In short, he smiled less, spoke less, and looked more depressed. Of course, it could also be said that he had become more mature. In less than half a year, he had been promoted from the leader of a regiment to the commander of an army. It could be said that he had been promoted on the front lines. During this time, he had been proud, lost and won battles. Until now, he had slowly become more mature. Could be said that all of this was forced. The culprit was Yang Chendong himself. The incident between Yang Taizhu and Chen Shuquan was a wake-up call for him. If it was not for Yu Mian's accidental appearance, the problem would not have been exposed. He could not even imagine the extent of the destruction. Now that he looked back at the cause and effect of the incident, these two people were guilty, but what about the others in Crimson City? Including himself, did he not have any responsibility at all? At the same time that he gave others power, he did not teach them how to use this power well, nor did he have enough supervision measures. It was fine if there was no problem with this kind of power, but once there was a problem, it would be a big problem that might involve himself. After the previous experience, Yang Chendong would undoubtedly be more careful when using people. This time, he did not promote Lung Song to the position of commander, but instead promoted Tiger's mane by 1 rank. Of course, through this matter, Yang Chendong was also telling the officials in Crimson City that there were some things that only he could decide. What should be given to you, will be given to you. If he didn't want to, no matter how hard you tried, or how many people you secretly gathered, it would be useless. At the very least, before Yang Xie was completely strong, this rule would not be changed. Yang Chendong thought in his heart. Speaking of Tiger's mane, he had followed him since he was young, and was the one who would not go against his will the least. This kind of person with experience and ability, why couldn't he be promoted to commander first? It was just that with Yang Chendong's actions, the one who suffered was Tiger's Mane, he felt an enormous pressure. Especially for him, who had just suffered a huge defeat, the pressure was even greater. At the same time that he carried the heavy responsibility, the pressure came with it. All the changes in Tiger's Mane were within Yang Chendong's expectations. But at the same time, this kind of change was delightful because it proved his growth, proved that Tiger's Mane was moving from an intermediate officer to a senior officer. As long as he could get through this, it would be much smoother for him when he did things in the future. Let's go and take a look at the new army. Yang Chendong stood up. Since he had chosen to put the heavy responsibility on Tiger's Mane, he naturally wouldn't just move his mouth. When it was time to put in effort, he would put in effort. The new army's barracks were still the same as the old barracks 10 miles outside the city. The only difference was that they had heavier responsibilities. Since it was called an army, there would naturally be divisions under it. The new army had 3 divisions, 3 regiments, and 1 battalion. The 3 divisions were the Independent Division, the Tatar Division, and the Recruit Division, led by Xian Honghai, Su He, and Lu Zhua. Tiger's Mane was the commander, and Shibi was the deputy commander. The 3 regiments were the Heavy Cavalry Regiment Commander Zhui Feng, the Light Cavalry Regiment Commander Ma Xiangshan, the Direct Cavalry Regiment Commander Deng Yu, and the Reconnaissance Battalion Commander Ding Shan. Among them, the divisions had 15 battalions plus 1 direct cavalry regiment, totaling 6,100 people. The regiments had 5 battalions, totaling 2,000 people. The reconnaissance battalion had 5 companies, totaling 500 people. The 3 divisions, 3 regiments, and 1 battalion had a total of 24,800 people. On the surface, other than wind-chasing wolf, everyone had been promoted, especially Shibi, who had soared to the sky in 1 step. He had been promoted from the regimental commander to the deputy commander. That was a big step. But in fact, Wind-Chasing Wolf was leading a heavy cavalry regiment. Although there were only 2,000 people, which was not as good as before, they were the elites of the elites. They were equipped with the most advanced armor and had several times more combat power than their actual number. To put it this way, if they didn't use firearms and only charged at the other party on the grassland, even a division wouldn't be able to do anything to them. On the contrary, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. It was precisely because he had the strongest warhorse, the best armor, and the most elite warriors that Wind-Chasing Wolf was still very happy even though he didn't get promoted this time. This was the cavalry team he had asked for before. It could be said that he had asked for benevolence and got benevolence. The establishment of the new army had basically digested all the fruits of victory from the previous battle in Wanda City. Now, other than the new army, only the logistics regiment led by Beta Persei and the fierce tiger regiment led by Xiao Feng were left in the first city. After handing over the matter of improving the military quality of the army and patrolling the surrounding areas to Tiger's Mane, Yang Chendong focused his energy on the construction of the city. There was no doubt that the first city would bear a very important position in the future and would even become an important symbol of the mercenary army. The planning and construction of the city were the most important problems. There were many things that even Yu Mian himself couldn't do. It was only the 6th young master who did it personally. Just as Yang Chendong's attention shifted from the war to the construction of the first city, the Ming army in Tulu City, which was 800 miles away, finally began to move. You're tuning into the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.